My graduation glow lasted exactly 3 days. I opened a folder in my dad's office and realized I had been trained, not chosen. I was not promoted, just replaced. When I asked my mom why, she smiled like a judge reading a sentence and said I was built to work, not to lead. That was the moment I stopped trying to earn a seat at a table they never planned to pull out for me. My name is Camille Warren, and I learned the difference between a family member and an employee exactly 72 hours after walking across a university stage. The graduation glow lasted exactly 3 days. That was it. 72 hours of delusional optimism where I actually believed the piece of paper in my hand, a Master of Business Administration with a concentration in operations management, was going to be the key that finally unlocked the heavy steel doors of my father's respect. I had spent the weekend in a haze of polite applause and staged photos. My mother, Marlene, had posed next to me with her hand on my shoulder, smiling for the camera with that terrifying porcelain perfection she reserved for public consumption. My father, Douglas, had patted my back twice, a gesture that felt less like pride and more like he was checking for a stud in a piece of drywall. My sister, Brielle, had been there too, checking her reflection in the screen of her phone, looking bored but beautiful. But by Tuesday morning, the gown was back in the closet, the diploma was still in its tube, and I was back at Warren Tool and Lineworks, standing in the middle of a shop floor that smelled of ozone, hydraulic fluid, and 40 years of unfulfilled promises. Nothing had changed. Absolutely nothing. I had walked in that morning wearing a blazer. It was a subtle choice, a sartorial signal that I was ready to transition from the girl who fixed the jammed conveyor belts to the woman who decided when to buy new ones. I sat at my desk, a cramped, repurposed drafting table, pushed into the corner of the logistics bullpen, and waited for the meeting invite. I waited for my father to call me into the glass-walled office overlooking the floor. I waited for him to say, "Camille, let's talk about the future." By 2 p.m, the blazer was draped over the back of my chair, and I was covered in a thin film of gray dust. The air conditioning in the main bay had failed again, and because I was the only one who knew how to bypass the thermostat sensor without tripping the breaker, I had spent 45 minutes on a ladder with a screwdriver in my teeth. When I walked back to the administrative wing, wiping grease from my knuckles with a shop rag, my father shouted my name. He didn't buzz me on the intercom. He didn't send an email. He just opened his door and bellowed Camille across the quiet hum of the office, the same way he called for the forklift operator. I walked into his office, fighting the urge to smooth my hair. I wanted to look professional, but I knew I looked like I'd been wrestling with a boiler. Which, to be fair, I effectively had. Douglas Warren sat behind his desk, a massive slab of mahogany that looked ridiculous against the linoleum floors. He was on the phone, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. He didn't look up when I entered. He just pointed a thick finger toward the wall of filing cabinets behind him. He covered the mouthpiece of the phone. "Grab the Johnston file," he said. His voice clipped. "And the quarterly compliance logs. The auditor is coming on Thursday, and I don't want to be hunting for them." He went back to his conversation, turning his chair away from me. "No, absolutely. We can handle that volume," he said into the phone, his voice booming with that salesman charm that disappeared the moment he hung up. I stood there for a second, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach. Routine paperwork. He was asking me to fetch files. I had a master's degree. I had just spent 2 years analyzing supply chain inefficiencies and corporate restructuring, and he was treating me like an intern. It felt like a test. It felt like he was checking to see if the degree had made me arrogant, checking to see if I was still his obedient little fixer. I swallowed my pride. Play the long game, I told myself. Show him you are willing to do the small work before you ask for the big work. I walked to the beige metal cabinets along the back wall. The drawer stuck, screeching in protest as I yanked it open. The Johnston file was thick, stuffed with invoices and change orders. I pulled it out, and as I did, a thin manila folder that had been wedged between it and the compliance log slipped out. It hit the floor with a soft slap. I crouched down to pick it up. My intention was purely mechanical. Retrieve the object, file it, leave the room. But as my hand hovered over the tab, the bold black letters stamped across the label caught my eye. Ownership transfer. Effective immediately. The world seemed to stop spinning, the hum of the shop floor through the glass, the drone of my father's voice on the phone, the rattle of the air conditioner. It all fell silent. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew this was private, but the date on the label was from last week, 2 days before my graduation. I opened the folder. It wasn't a draft. It was an executed legal document, notarized and stamped. I scanned the pages, my eyes darting frantically, looking for context that would make sense of what I was seeing. And then, I found the organizational chart. It was a simple diagram. At the top, in the box labeled Managing Owner/Chief Executive Officer, was a name, Brielle Warren. I blinked, waiting for the letters to rearrange themselves. Brielle? My sister couldn't read a balance sheet if her life depended on it. Brielle thought overhead was a direction, not a cost. She showed up to the shop maybe once a month to take photos for her Instagram, wearing a hard hat that had never seen a day of work, captioning it Boss Babe or Legacy. And yet, there it was, her name, etched in legal permanence at the top of the hierarchy. My eyes dropped to the box below hers. I was looking for my name next to hers. Maybe it was a partnership. Maybe we were co-owners. Douglas had always talked about the Warren girls taking over. I found my name. It was in a smaller box, connected by a dotted line off to the side, completely separate from the chain of command. Camille Warren. Operational support. Phase down. Phase down. The words felt like a physical blow to the chest. Not Director of Operations, not VP of Logistics, operational support. And the parenthetical, phase down, wasn't a job title. It was an expiration date. It meant they needed me to keep the machines running while Brielle learned how to sit in the big chair. And then, nothing. I wasn't being promoted. I wasn't even being included. I was being replaced. My hands started to tremble, a fine, high-frequency vibration that rattled the paper. I looked up at my father's back. He was still laughing, swiveling gently in his chair, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just destroyed my life with a few signatures. I turned the page. I needed to see more. I needed to understand the mechanics of this betrayal. Attached to the back of the transfer agreement was a bank form. It was a loan modification document for a credit expansion, a massive line of credit, hundreds of thousands of dollars, tied to the business assets. It listed the guarantors, Douglas Warren, Marlene Warren, Brielle Warren, Camille Warren. I stared at my signature. It was scrawled in blue ink on the bottom line. It looked like my signature. The loop of the C was right. The sharp slant of the W was familiar. But I had never seen this document in my life. I had never sat in a room with a banker and agreed to leverage my personal credit. My future, for a company I apparently didn't even work for anymore. Had I signed it in a stack of invoices? Had he slid it under my nose one afternoon when I was exhausted, covered in grease, just trying to get a shipment out the door? Or had someone else signed it for me? A wave of nausea rolled over me. It was one thing to be sidelined. It was another thing entirely to be used. They had stripped me of authority but shackled me with liability. If Brielle drove this company into the ground, which she absolutely would, the bank wouldn't just come for the shop. They would come for me. They would come for the assets I didn't have yet. Camille, you find it? My father's voice cut through the fog. He had hung up the phone. I slammed the folder shut. Panic, hot and sharp, spiked in my chest. If he saw me reading this, the confrontation would happen now. And I wasn't ready. I was shaking. I was on the verge of tears. And if there was one rule in the Warren household, it was that tears were an admission of defeat. Tears were for weak people who couldn't handle the pressure. The file was stuck, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant, like I was speaking from underwater. I quickly shoved the ownership transfer folder back into the gap between the logs, pushing it deep into the shadows of the cabinet. I grabbed the Johnston file and the compliance logs. Standing up and turning around in one fluid motion, I forced my face into a mask. It was a skill I had learned from my mother. Ironically, mask the pain, smile through the fracture. I walked over to his desk and placed the requested files on the mahogany surface. My hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped, replaced by a cold, hard numbness. "Here," I said. Douglas didn't look up. He was already dialing another number. "Great. Put them on the corner. And hey, check the pressure valve on line 4 before you head out. It was acting up this morning." He was dismissing me. He had just handed his other daughter the keys to the kingdom, and he was asking me to go fix a leaky valve. "Sure, Dad," I said. "I'll handle it." I walked out of the office. Feeling the heavy glass door click shut behind me, I walked past the administrative desks, past the break room where Brielle's picture was taped to the refrigerator from the company Christmas party, past the time clock. I walked out onto the shop floor. The noise was deafening. The rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the punch press. The high-pitched whine of the grinder. It was the soundtrack of my childhood. I had grown up in this noise. I loved this noise. But now, it sounded different. It sounded like a machine that was eating me alive. I went to line 4. I checked the pressure valve. It was loose, just like he said. I took a wrench from my belt. I always carried tools, unlike Brielle, and I tightened it. I watched the needle on the gauge stabilize. I did the work. I did the job. I finished my shift. I answered 3 emails from suppliers who didn't know I was a phase-down employee. I locked the side gate. I did everything exactly as I was supposed to. I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of the tires on the asphalt. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at my small kitchen table in the dark. I thought about calling someone, a friend, my boyfriend. But what would I say? My family stole my future? My dad forged my signature? It sounded insane. It sounded like a soap opera. I reached into my bag and pulled out a black notebook. I had bought it for the new job. The job I thought I was starting today. The job of a leader. I opened it to the first fresh page. I picked up a pen. I didn't write a resignation letter. I didn't write a list of grievances. I wrote down the reality of my situation, stripping away the hope and the love and the loyalty that had blinded me for 24 years. I wrote one sentence, pressing the pen so hard into the paper that the ink bled through to the other side. If I'm support, they can try running without me. I closed the book. The graduation glow was gone. In its place, something else was beginning to burn. Something slower, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. I wasn't going to quit. Not yet. I was going to watch. I was going to wait. And when the machine they didn't understand started to break, I was going to make sure I was the only one holding the manual, to understand why I did not scream, why I did not tear that office apart, and why I simply went back to work that afternoon. You have to understand the soil in which I grew. I was not raised in a house. I was raised inside Warren Tool and Line Works, a sprawling, corrugated metal beast of a building sitting on a patch of scorched earth just outside Savannah, Georgia. While other little girls were playing with dolls or learning how to braid hair, I was learning the difference between a Phillips and a flathead before I could write my own name in cursive. The shop was my nursery, my playground, and my church. It smelled of sulfur, ozone, and the distinct, sharp tang of hydraulic fluid that settles in the back of your throat and never really leaves. The sound of my childhood was not lullabies, but the rhythmic, earth-shaking thud of the 20-ton punch press and the high-pitched scream of the metal lathe. My father, Douglas, liked to tell people that the business was in his blood. He would stand at the front of the shop when new clients came in, men in clean suits from Atlanta or Charlotte, and he would sweep his arm across the floor like a preacher delivering a sermon. He would talk about legacy. He would talk about how Warren Tool was built on 3 generations of sweat and integrity. He spoke with a gravelly, blue-collar reverence that made the clients nod and feel like they were shaking hands with the backbone of America. But that speech was a performance. It was a script he memorized, just like the safety briefing he gave but never followed. The truth was, the shop floor terrified him. Douglas liked the idea of the machines, the power they represented, and the money they printed when they were running right. But he hated the grease. He hated the heat that built up in the bay during a Georgia July until the air shimmered and your lungs felt like they were filled with wet cotton. Most of all, he hated the problems. When a machine broke down, Douglas did not roll up his sleeves. He panicked. He yelled. He looked for someone to blame. That was where I came in. By the time I was 12, I was spending my summers sorting inventory in the sweltering loft above the main office. By 14, I was running the drill press under the supervision of Old Man Miller, our lead machinist, who had missing fingers on his left hand and a patience that my father lacked entirely. By 16, I was the one people came to when the world stopped turning. I remember the first time I realized that my father was not the king of this kingdom. It was a Tuesday in August. A rush order for a naval contractor was on the line, and the main hydraulic pump on the primary injection molder blew a seal. Oil spewed everywhere, coating the floor in a slick, dangerous sheen. The machine groaned and died. Silence fell over the shop, heavy and terrifying. Douglas came running out of his office, his face purple. He started screaming at the shift foreman, waving his arms, asking how this could happen, asking how much it would cost, asking who was going to pay for the downtime. He was useless. He was noise. I was 16 years old. I walked past him, ignoring his shouting, and knelt by the pump. I knew this machine. I knew that it vibrated too hard when it ran at 80% capacity, and I knew that the rear seal always took the brunt of it. I didn't ask for permission. I grabbed a wrench and a bucket. I bypassed the primary valve, bled the line, and swapped the seal with a spare I had stashed in a drawer because I knew this day would come. It took me 20 minutes. When I stood up, covered in black grease from my elbows to my fingertips, I hit the reset button. The machine coughed, shuddered, and then hummed back to life. The crew cheered, not for Douglas, for me. My father stopped yelling. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw something that looked like pride. But then he cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and turned back to the foreman. "See?" he said, his voice booming. "I told you we could get it running. Let's get back to work." He took the credit. I took the grease. That was the dynamic. That was the rule. My mother, Marlene, was even worse, though in a different way. If Douglas was the performative workman, Marlene was the curator of the illusion. She did not come to the shop often. She found the place repulsive, to her. Warren Tool and Lineworks was just the engine that funded her life. The leased luxury SUVs, the country club membership, the endless renovations on our house in the historic district. She cared about the brand. She wanted the logo to look sleek on the letterhead. She wanted us to sponsor the charity golf tournaments so she could wear a nice dress and stand next to the mayor. She would look at my hands at the dinner table, hands that were permanently stained, with cuticles ragged from solvent and nails cut short for safety, and she would sigh. "Camille," she would say, tapping her own manicured fingernails on the glass table. "You look like a mechanic. It is not ladylike. You are never going to find a husband if you smell like a gas station." And then there was Brielle, my sister, 2 years younger, and a universe away. If I was the shop floor, Brielle was the showroom. She floated through life with a camera-ready smile and an uncanny ability to be exactly where the light was best. She visited the shop too, but she visited it like a tourist. She would breeze in through the front door, the bell chiming cheerfully, wearing white sneakers that never seemed to touch the dirt. "Hi, Daddy? Hi, Cam," she would chirp, waving her phone around. She would take a selfie next to a pile of raw steel, captioning it, "Grinding Our Family Empire," and then she would sit in the air-conditioned office and flip through magazines while I sweated through my shirt 10 feet away. The workers treated her like a porcelain doll. They watched their language around her. They opened doors for her. They smiled specifically for her. When I walked by, they just nodded. They respected me, yes, but they treated me like one of them. I was equipment. Brielle was an asset. The hardest lesson, the one that took me years to learn, was about the money. You would think that working for your family meant you were taken care of. You would think it meant security. But in the Warren household, family was a word used to justify exploitation. I started working full shifts the summer I turned 18. I was doing the work of a logistics coordinator, a maintenance tech, and a scheduler combined. When the first payday came, my envelope was light. I asked my father about it. We were in his truck, driving home. "Dad," I said, holding the check, "this is calculated at $8 an hour, and it is missing the overtime." He laughed, clapping a hand on my knee. "Camille, honey, come on. You live at home. You don't have rent. The business is tight right now. We have to make payroll for the guys with families, right? Your family. It all comes back to you in the end. We are building this for you girls." It all comes back to you in the end. That phrase became the mantra of my 20s, when I needed a new car because my old sedan died. Douglas told me to drive the company truck, a beat-up Ford with 200,000 miles on it, because the company couldn't afford a new lease for me. 2 weeks later, Brielle got a brand new convertible for her 21st birthday because, as Marlene put it, she needs to look the part for her internships. Brielle's internships were unpaid, vague roles at fashion boutiques or event planning firms where she mostly went to lunch. My internship was managing a supply chain crisis at 2 a.m. because a shipment of steel from Alabama got stuck in a storm. I stopped asking for raises. I stopped asking for fair treatment. I told myself it was an investment. I was paying my dues. I was earning my equity in sweat. I believed, with a naive and desperate certainty, that there was a scorecard somewhere. I believed that my father was keeping a tally. Camille fixed the press. Camille renegotiated the vendor contract. Camille stayed late on Christmas Eve to do inventory. I thought the score would matter. I watched Brielle fail college algebra twice. I watched her switch majors 3 times. I watched her float through life on a raft made of my parents' indulgence. And I kept working. I kept my head down. When I decided to get my MBA, it wasn't because I wanted to leave. It was because I wanted to force them to see me. I thought that if I had the credentials, if I had the letters after my name, they would have to stop treating me like the help. I thought a master's degree was the one thing they couldn't ignore. It was objective. It was a fact. You can't argue with a diploma. I worked 60-hour weeks at the shop while going to school at night. I wrote papers on operations management while sitting in the break room. Eating vending machine crackers, I studied for my finals with hands that were still shaking from operating the forklift. I remember telling Marlene I got into the graduate program. She was looking at samples for new curtains in the living room. "That is nice, Camille," she said, not looking up. "Just make sure it does not interfere with the inventory audit next month. Your father is really stressed about it." That was the baseline. My achievements were only relevant if they didn't inconvenience the business. My value was strictly operational, but I held on to the hope. I clung to it like a life raft. Wait until graduation, I told myself. Wait until I walk across that stage. Then we will have the meeting. Then they will make me a partner. Then the pay will come. I built an entire future in my head based on that logic. I imagined the conversation. Douglas would sit me down, pour 2 glasses of scotch, and say, "You did it, kid. You earned it. Here is your share." I believed it right up until the moment I opened that folder. So, when I stood in the office and saw Brielle's name listed as managing owner, it wasn't just a business decision. It was a rewriting of my entire history. Every missed birthday party I spent checking invoices, every scar on my hands from sharp metal, every time I accepted a paycheck that was half of what I was worth. It was all theft. They hadn't just used my labor, they had used my life. They had let me build the throne so my sister could sit in it. The shop floor didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a cage I had built for myself, bar by bar, bolt by bolt, and the worst part was, I knew exactly how to take it apart. I knew where the load-bearing walls were. I knew where the weak points in the foundation were hidden. They thought they had trained a worker. They forgot they had raised a mechanic. And a mechanic knows exactly how to dismantle a machine without making a sound until it is too late. The week after I found the folder in the filing cabinet was the longest week of my life. I walked into the shop with a freshly minted master's degree and a secret that burned a hole in my stomach. Expecting, naively, that something would shift. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I kept waiting for my father to call me into his office and explain the phase-down plan to my face. I thought he would at least have the decency to fire me properly or demote me with a conversation, but there was no conversation. There was no meeting. There was no acknowledgement that I had just spent 2 years of my life studying advanced organizational theory and supply chain economics. Instead, the silence was absolute. It was business as usual, only heavier. On Monday morning, I arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. My inbox was already full. Douglas had forwarded me 3 separate crisis threads from the weekend: a delayed steel shipment from Birmingham, a quality control dispute with a client in Charleston, and a staffing issue on the night shift. There was no note attached to any of them. No, "Good morning, Camille." No, "Congratulations on graduating," just the raw data of problems he did not want to solve. I sat at my desk, the air conditioner rattling above me, and realized that to them, my degree was not a qualification for leadership. It was just a tool that made me a more efficient shovel. They did not want my strategy. They wanted my capacity to absorb pain. The workload did not just stay the same. It spiked. It was as if Douglas sensed that I might be expecting a promotion. So he buried me in grunt work to remind me of my place. I spent 12 hours that Monday on the floor, reorganizing the parts cage because the inventory count was off by 4%. I was moving crates of heavy bolts, sweating through my blouse, while Douglas sat in his office with his feet up, reading a golf magazine. "You are good at the details, Camille," he said when he walked past me on his way to lunch. "We need someone who really understands the nuts and bolts." He said it like a compliment. I heard it as a confinement. By Wednesday, the physical exhaustion was setting in, but it was the psychological whiplash that was tearing me apart. This was where Brielle came into the picture. Before that week, Brielle's presence at the shop had been sporadic at best. She would pop in to ask for money or to pick up a package she had shipped to the business address to avoid porch pirates. But suddenly, with her name listed as managing owner on a document locked in the cabinet 10 feet away, she began to play the part. She started arriving at 10 in the morning. She did not wear safety boots. She wore heels that clicked loudly on the concrete, a sound that made the machinists look up from their lathes with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. She carried a leather portfolio that I knew for a fact contained nothing but her personal planner and maybe a granola bar. She did not come to me to ask how the business worked. She did not ask about the margins or the lead times. Instead, she held vision meetings with Douglas. They would shut themselves in the conference room, the one with the glass walls so everyone could see them, and point at whiteboards. I would be on the phone with a furious supplier, negotiating a payment plan because our cash flow was tight, and I would look up to see Brielle laughing, holding a dry erase marker, drawing vague circles on the board. She looked the part. She looked like a stock photo of a young female executive. The disconnect between the image and the reality reached its breaking point on Thursday. We had just finished a massive custom fabrication project for a stadium renovation in Atlanta. It was a complex job, structural brackets that required precise welding and tolerance testing. I had personally overseen the quality assurance. I had spent 3 nights the previous week on the floor with the welders, measuring seams with a micrometer, rejecting parts that were even a millimeter off. I had signed off on the final crate. I had arranged the logistics. On Thursday afternoon, I took a break to drink a lukewarm coffee in the break room. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. The first thing on my feed was a post from Brielle. It was a photo of the stadium brackets. She must have taken it right before they were loaded onto the truck. The lighting was perfect. She had used a filter that made the steel look artistic, almost glowing. The caption read, "Finalizing another massive project for the team. Leadership means ensuring every detail is perfect before it leaves the door. So proud of my vision coming to life." Woman in Charge Manufacturing Legacy. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the glass. My vision. She didn't even know what alloy we had used. She couldn't tell you the difference between a TIG weld and a MIG weld if you held a torch to her head. And yet, there she was, claiming the sweat of the 20 men on the floor and the 60 hours of oversight I had poured into those brackets. I looked at the comments. "You go, girl." Such a boss. Incredible work. Brielle. My mother had liked the post. Douglas had commented with a muscle arm emoji. I put my phone down on the table with a slow, deliberate motion because if I hadn't, I would have thrown it through the drywall. It wasn't just vanity, it was theft. She was stealing my professional credibility in real time, building a public portfolio based on my labor. I went back to work. I didn't say a word. I just added it to the mental ledger I was keeping. That night, the real crisis hit. It was 11:30 at night. I was at home, just getting out of the shower, trying to wash the smell of the shop out of my hair. My phone rang. It was the dispatch line. "Camille, we have a problem," the night manager said. His voice was tight. "The truck for the Savannah port delivery broke down on I-16. The driver says the transmission is shot. That container has to be at the terminal by 5 in the morning or we miss the ship date. If we miss the ship date, the penalty clause is $10,000 a day." I closed my eyes, water dripping from my hair onto the bath mat. I could have said no. I could have said, "Call the owner, call Brielle." But I knew Brielle was probably asleep or at a bar, and I knew Douglas would just yell and tell me to fix it anyway. And the sickening truth was, I still cared about the shop. I cared about the reputation of the business, even if the business didn't care about me. "Where is he?" I asked. "Mile marker 42. I am on my way," I said. I dressed in the dark. I drove to the shop, unlocked the gate, and fired up the backup flatbed. I drove 40 miles out to the highway in the middle of the night. I met the stranded driver. We manually transferred the lighter pallets to my truck, and I coordinated a third-party hotshot driver to take the rest. I stood on the side of the highway in the humidity, waving flares, directing traffic, sweating through my clothes again. We got the cargo to the port at 4:45 in the morning. 15 minutes to spare. I didn't get home until 6. I slept for an hour, then I showered, put on my blazer, and went to work. I walked into the Friday morning stand-up meeting at 8 o'clock. I was running on caffeine and adrenaline. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand. Douglas was standing at the head of the table. Brielle was sitting next to him, looking fresh and rested, holding a cup of herbal tea. "All right, everyone," Douglas said, clapping his hands. "Good week. Rough spots. But we got through it." He looked around the room at the foreman and the office staff. "I want to give a special shout-out to the logistics handling on the port job," Douglas said. "We had a hiccup last night, but it got handled seamlessly. That is the kind of reliability our clients expect." He turned to Brielle. "Brielle," he said, beaming. "Great job staying on top of that. I know you were monitoring the situation." I froze. The room went silent. Brielle didn't flinch. She didn't look at me. She just smiled a modest, humble smile. "Thanks, Dad," she said. "It was a team effort, really. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss the window." She had been asleep. She hadn't sent a single email. She hadn't even known the truck was broken until 5 minutes ago. I looked at Douglas. He knew. He had to know. The night manager must have told him I was the one who drove out there, but he was looking at her with that blind, willful adoration. He wanted her to be the hero, so he simply decided that she was. I opened my mouth. The words were there. I was on the highway. I drove the truck. But then I remembered the folder. Operational support. Phase down. If I spoke up, I would look petty. I would look like the jealous sister trying to steal the spotlight. They had set the stage so perfectly that the truth would sound like a complaint. So I said nothing. I tightened my grip on my pen until the plastic barrel cracked. "Good work," Douglas said. Meeting adjourned. After that meeting, the freeze-out began in earnest. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. I noticed it first with the calendar invites. The weekly Operations Outlook meeting, which I had led for 3 years, disappeared from my schedule. When I asked the admin about it, she looked uncomfortable. "Oh, Brielle said she wanted to restructure that meeting," she said, not meeting my eyes. "She said it is going to be more of a high-level strategy session now, so they don't need the technical staff." Technical staff. Then the email stopped. I used to be copied on every correspondence with our top 3 clients. Suddenly, I was only getting the forwards when something was broken: the relationship building, the lunch invites, the contract renewals. I was ghosted. I would walk into a room, and the conversation would stop. Douglas and Brielle would be huddled over a blueprint, and the moment I stepped through the door, they would straighten up and change the subject to the weather or the football game. It was a physical sensation. Being pushed out, it felt like the air in the office was getting thinner around me. I was becoming a ghost in the building I helped build. But ghosts are excellent observers. I stopped trying to be part of the club. I went back to my desk in the corner, and I opened my notebook. I started tracking everything. I created a log. Date: June 12th. Incident: port delivery crisis. Action: personally managed backup logistics. Credit taken: Brielle Warren, publicly in staff meeting. Date: June 14th. Incident: vendor dispute. Zinc supply. Action: renegotiated 10% discount. Exclusion: removed from final contract signing email chain. Date: June 16th. Incident: safety protocol update. Action: rewrote the OSHA compliance manual. Observation: Brielle submitted it to the auditor under her signature. I wrote it all down: every lie, every hour, every dollar. I was working differently now. I wasn't working to save the company. I was working to build a case. I answered emails with meticulous precision, always blind copying my personal address. I saved every invoice. I documented every time I was asked to fix a mistake Brielle had made. And then, 10 days after graduation, I got the alert. It wasn't a big dramatic envelope like the first one. It was a ping on my phone while I was eating a sandwich in my car. It was from a credit monitoring service I had signed up for years ago and forgotten about. Security alert: address change detected. I frowned. I hadn't moved. I opened the app. It showed a change of address request on a credit line, not my personal credit card, but a commercial guarantor account linked to my Social Security number. The address had been changed from the business office to a post office box in a town 3 counties over. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Why would they move the billing address for a credit line I was supposedly guaranteeing? I dug deeper into the app. There was a recent inquiry, a hard pull on my credit report. Inquiry entity: North-South Equipment Leasing. Date: yesterday. Amount requested: $50,000. I hadn't applied for equipment leasing. We didn't need new equipment. I realized then that the phase down in my job title didn't apply to my utility. It only applied to my authority. They were phasing me out of the decisions, but they were ramping me up as a liability. They were using my credit score, which was perfect. Unlike Douglas's leverage-heavy history, to secure fresh capital for whatever vision Brielle was selling them, and by changing the address to a P.O. box. They were trying to hide the statements from me. I sat in my car, staring at the screen. The sandwich turned to ash in my mouth. They weren't just stealing my career. They were stealing my financial identity. I took a screenshot. I emailed it to a secure folder. Then I put the car in reverse and drove back to the loading dock. I walked past Douglas's office. He was showing Brielle a pie chart on his computer screen. They both looked happy. They looked safe. I walked to my desk, sat down, and unlocked my computer. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply opened a new spreadsheet. If they wanted to use my name, they were going to pay for it. The whiplash was over. The steady, cold calculation had begun. I was done waiting for a seat at the table. I was going to start sawing off the legs. The shop was never truly silent. Even when the lights were killed in the main bay and the heavy roll-up doors were chained shut, the building breathed. The compressors cycled on and off with a low shudder. The cooling fans in the server room hummed like a hive of angry bees. For years, I had found comfort in that mechanical respiration. It meant the business was alive, but tonight, sitting in my darkened corner of the office at 7:30 in the evening, the sound felt different. It sounded like a countdown. I waited until I saw the taillights of my father's truck fade down the access road. He had left early for a dinner with potential investors, a dinner I was not invited to. Despite having prepared the pitch deck he was currently misquoting, Brielle had left at 3 o'clock for a site visit that I knew was actually a hair appointment. The cleaning crew did not come on Tuesdays. I was alone. I stood up and walked to the glass door of Douglas's office. It was locked. Of course, he had started locking it 3 days ago, a new habit that screamed paranoia. But he forgot that I was the one who had ordered the replacement tumblers when the old lock jammed last year. I had the master key on my ring, right next to the fob for the gate. I slid the key in. The mechanism turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I stepped inside. The room smelled of his cologne and stale coffee. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The ambient glow from the security lamps in the parking lot filtered through the blinds, painting the room in stripes of gray and black. It was enough. I went straight to the beige cabinet. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. In part 1, when the folder fell out, I had been a daughter discovering a betrayal. Now, I was an auditor discovering a crime. There is a profound difference in the physiology of those two states. One is panic, the other is precision. I opened the drawer. I bypassed the Johnston file. I went deeper. I knew where he hid the things he didn't want Marlene to see. The gambling losses, the secret credit card statements. So I assumed the things he didn't want me to see would be in the same sector. I was right. Behind a stack of old tax returns from 2018, there was a thick, blue expanding file. It didn't have a label. I pulled it out and carried it to the desk, laying it flat in the strip of light. I opened it, and the scope of the deception laid itself out before me like a map of a battlefield. The first document was a draft of a state filing. It was the Articles of Amendment for the corporate structure. I read the text. It listed Brielle Warren as the controlling member with 51% equity. Marlene Warren held 29%. Douglas Warren held 20%. My name was nowhere on the equity split, 0%. But I already knew I was being cut out of the ownership. That wasn't the new information. The new information was in the timeline. The draft was dated 4 months ago. They had planned this before my final semester even started. While I was pulling all-nighters to finish my thesis on lean manufacturing and family-owned enterprises, a thesis I wrote to help this company, they were already finalizing the paperwork to erase me. I set that aside and dug deeper. The next document was the lender packet. This was the source of the bank alert I had received. It was a formal application for a credit facility expansion, $250,000. I scanned the use of funds section, renovation of executive offices, rebranding and marketing initiative, vehicle lease upgrades. I almost laughed out loud in the dark room. They were borrowing $250,000 not to upgrade the aging CNC machines that broke down every week, not to fix the leaking roof in the warehouse, but to make the offices look pretty and buy Brielle a better car. They were going to burn this money on aesthetics. And then I saw how they got the money. The bank required personal guarantees. Douglas's credit was shot from a bad real estate deal in 2008. Marlene had no income history. Brielle had a credit score that probably hovered in the low 600s due to unpaid store cards. But I had a score of 810. I had zero debt. I had a history of meticulous payments. I turned to the signature page. There it was. Under the line for Guarantor 4. Camille Warren. I leaned in close, squinting in the dim light. The ink was blue. The slant was sharp. To a stranger. To a loan officer glancing at a stack of 50 pages. It looked authentic, but I knew my hand. I knew the way I crossed my T's. A clean, straight line. This T had a little loop at the end. A flourish. It was Marlene's handwriting. My mother had forged my signature. She had sat at this desk, or perhaps at the kitchen table, and practiced writing my name until it looked close enough to pass. And then she had signed away my financial future to buy new furniture. I realized the full architecture of their plan. It wasn't just about giving Brielle the title. It was about using me as the battery to power her reign. They needed my brain to run the floor, which was why they kept me as operational support, and they needed my credit to fund the lifestyle, which was why they forged my name. I was the engine, they were the passengers, and they had locked me under the hood where no one could see me. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the forgery. I expected to feel rage. I expected to want to scream, but the anger didn't come. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me. It was the feeling of an equation finally balancing. They don't love you, a voice in my head whispered. They are consuming you. I took out my phone. I didn't take photos. Photos can be blurry, and flash can be seen from the parking lot. I walked over to the copier in the corner of the room. I woke it up. The screen glowed bright blue, blinding in the darkness. I placed the documents on the glass. The equity split, the loan application, the forged signature page. I hit copy. The machine whirred, a beam of light scanning the evidence of their felony. I made 2 copies of everything. Then, I took a step further. I scanned them to a USB drive I kept on my keychain, my emergency backup drive. I deleted the scan log from the machine's history. I wiped the glass with the sleeve of my blouse to remove fingerprints. I took the paper copies and folded them, sliding them into the inside pocket of my blazer, right against my ribs. Then, I began the reconstruction. I put the originals back in the blue file. I put the blue file back in the drawer, behind the 2018 tax returns. I aligned the edges perfectly. I locked the drawer. I wiped the handle. I walked out of the office and locked the door behind me. I walked out of the building. I set the alarm. I locked the gate. I drove home. When I walked into my apartment, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't call my boyfriend to vent. I walked into my bedroom, took the folded copies out of my pocket, and placed them in a fireproof lockbox under my bed. Then I took a shower. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink. I washed off the dust of the shop and the invisible slime of my family's betrayal. I put on clean pajamas. I climbed into bed. Usually, my mind would be racing at this hour. I would be worrying about the shipping schedule or the inventory count, or whether Douglas had remembered to call the insurance broker. I would be mentally fixing problems that hadn't even happened yet. But tonight, my mind was silent. I didn't have to worry about the business anymore. The business belonged to the managing owner. The credit line belonged to the guarantor, the fake one they had created. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the weight of the Warren legacy pressing down on my chest. I felt light. I felt detached. I slept like a baby. I slept like someone who had finally stopped begging for love and started planning for war. The next morning, my alarm went off at 6:30. I didn't hit snooze. I dressed in my standard work attire, slacks, a sensible blouse, steel-toed boots. I made my coffee. I drove to the shop. I swiped my badge at the time clock. The red numbers read 7:59, 1 minute before my shift started. In the past, I would have been there at 7:15. I would have already brewed the coffee for the office, unlocked the bay doors, and briefed the floor manager on the day's priorities. Today, the coffee pot was cold and empty, the bay doors were still shut, and a dozen machinists were standing around outside, smoking cigarettes and looking confused. "Morning, Camille," one of them called out. "Doors are locked. Old man Miller doesn't have the key." "Morning, Dave," I said, offering a polite, pleasant smile. "I know. I don't have the key either. Douglas took my master set last week to give to Brielle, remember?" That was a lie. Technically, I had a key, but operational support staff don't open the building. Owners do. "So, what do we do?" Dave asked. I checked my watch. "I guess we wait for the managing owner." I stood there on the sidewalk with them, sipping my travel mug coffee. I didn't call Douglas. I didn't call Brielle. I just waited. Brielle rolled up at 8:20 in her white convertible. She looked flustered when she saw the entire morning shift standing in the parking lot. "Why is everyone outside?" she asked, getting out of the car, her heels crunching on the gravel. "Doors are locked, Miss Warren," Dave said. Brielle looked at me. "Camille, why didn't you open up?" I looked at her, my face a mask of calm, helpful confusion. "Oh, I don't open up anymore. Brielle, remember? Dad said you wanted to handle site security protocols. I didn't want to overstep." She blinked. She didn't know if that was true or not, because she never listened to anything Douglas said about operations. "Right," she muttered. "Well, does anyone have a key?" "You should have one on your ring," I said helpfully. She fumbled through her purse for 2 minutes, while 20 men on the payroll watched. Finally, she found it. She struggled with the lock for another minute because you have to jiggle it upward while you turn. I watched her struggle. I knew exactly how to do it. I kept my hands in my pockets. When we finally got inside, the shop was hot and stuffy. The air compressors hadn't been started. I walked to my desk and sat down. The day proceeded exactly like that. At 10 o'clock, the receptionist, Sarah, came to my desk. She looked stressed. "Camille, the printer is out of toner again, and the supply closet is locked." "Oh, that's frustrating," I said, typing on my keyboard. Sarah waited. Usually, this was the part where I would pull a spare toner cartridge out of my bottom drawer or give her the key to the closet. "So," Sarah trailed off. "You should probably submit a procurement request to Brielle," I said, not looking up. "She is handling all inventory oversight now. We need to respect the chain of command." Sarah walked away, looking confused. At 11:30, the phone rang. It was a client from Ohio. "Camille, where are the spec sheets for the new order? You guys said you'd have them by noon." "Hello, Mr. Henderson," I said. "I believe Brielle is finalizing those. Let me transfer you to her line." "I don't want her line. I want the specs. You always do them." "I know," I said, my voice dripping with professional regret. "But my role has shifted to support. Brielle is the lead on your account now. She has the vision for the project. Hold on 1 second. I transferred him. I watched through the glass as Brielle's phone rang. She looked at it, frowned, and let it go to voicemail. I didn't pick it back up. By 2 o'clock, the cracks were starting to show. They were small, hairline fractures in the foundation. A delivery driver was wandering around the loading dock because no one had signed his manifest. The break room was out of coffee. The printer was still flashing low toner. The air conditioning in the conference room was making a rattling noise that I usually fixed with a quick kick to the condenser unit. But today, I let it rattle. Douglas came out of his office at 3. He looked annoyed. "Camille, why is it so hot in here? And why is Henderson calling me saying he can't get a hold of anyone?" I looked up from my monitor. I was working on a spreadsheet, a personal budget spreadsheet. Actually, though he couldn't see that. "I transferred him to Brielle, Dad," I said. "And the AC unit needs maintenance. I sent a ticket to the managing owner's email this morning." "Just fix it, Camille," he snapped. "I would love to," I said. "But I don't have the authorization to call the HVAC vendor anymore. Remember the memo last week? All external vendor expenses over $100 require owner approval." He stared at me. He had written that memo to stop the shop foreman from buying expensive tools. He hadn't realized it applied to me. "Fine," he grunted. "I'll sign it. Just get it done. As soon as I get the signed work order, I'll make the call," I said pleasantly. He stormed off. I didn't make the call. I waited for the work order. It never came, because Douglas forgot to write it 5 seconds after he walked away. So the AC kept rattling. The heat kept rising. I worked until 5 o'clock exactly. The moment the digital clock on the wall clicked over to 5 o'clock, I saved my work. I put my pen in the holder. I picked up my purse. Usually, I stayed until 6 or 6:30 to catch the West Coast emails. I walked past Brielle's office. She was staring at her computer screen, looking overwhelmed. She had a stack of papers on her desk. The spec sheets for Henderson, probably. "Leaving?" she asked, sounding almost accusatory. "Shift's over," I said. "Have a great night, Brielle." I walked out the door. The sun was still high in the sky. It felt strange to leave while there was still daylight. As I walked to my car, I could hear the faint, rhythmic rattle of the broken AC unit through the brick wall. Clank, clank, clank. It wasn't a loud noise. Not yet. But it was the sound of a machine that was beginning to eat itself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have the urge to turn around and fix it. The most difficult part of burning down a house you helped build is ignoring the smoke alarms. For 7 years, I had been the fire extinguisher. I was the person who answered the phone at 2 a.m. when the alarm system glitched. I was the one who drove to the warehouse on Thanksgiving morning because a pipe burst. I was the one who smoothed over the rough edges of my father's temper and my sister's incompetence with unpaid overtime and sheer force of will. We called it taking one for the team, but in reality, it was hero work. It was the unglamorous, exhausting labor of keeping a dying machine alive by feeding it pieces of your own life. But after the night I found the folder, I retired the hero. I stopped answering the phone after 5 o'clock. I stopped checking my email on weekends. I stopped swinging by the shop on my way to the grocery store just to make sure the gates were locked. The silence on my end was deafening, but the noise in the shop was getting louder. It started with the small things. The daily friction of a manufacturing business is immense. Without grease, the gears start to grind immediately. On Tuesday of the second week of my phase down, I sat at my desk and watched the chaos unfold through the glass partition. A shipment of raw aluminum had arrived at the loading dock. Usually, I would have already printed the receiving labels, cross-referenced the purchase order, and assigned a forklift driver to rack it. Today, I did none of that. The driver, a large man named Miller, who had been delivering to us for 10 years, stood at the counter, looking annoyed. He rang the service bell. Ding, ding, ding. Sarah, the receptionist, looked at me with pleading eyes. "Camille? Miller is here." I looked up from my computer, where I was calmly organizing my personal files. "I see him, Sarah, but receiving is an inventory function. Per the new org chart, all inventory approvals must go through the managing owner." "But Brielle is at lunch," Sarah whispered. "Then I guess Miller has to wait," I said. My voice steady and devoid of malice. Miller waited for 90 minutes. By the time Brielle breezed in, carrying a takeout salad and an iced coffee, Miller was furious. He slapped the manifest on the counter, demanded a signature, and told Brielle that next time, he was dropping the load in the parking lot and leaving. Brielle signed it without checking the count. I made a note in my log. June 22nd, unverified inventory intake, potential shrinkage risk, high. This was my new method. I didn't fix the problems. I documented them. I became a bureaucrat of the highest order. Every time a crisis landed on my desk, a missing invoice, a broken tool, a client complaint, I didn't solve it. I routed it. I created a standardized email template. Subject: action required. Management decision needed. To Brielle Warren, Douglas Warren. From Camille Warren. Operational support. Issue: insert crisis. Here, protocol. Requires executive approval regarding budget/timeline. Please advise. I sent 20 of these emails a day. They piled up in Brielle's inbox like unexploded ordnance. She didn't know how to answer them. She didn't know if we could afford the expedited shipping. She didn't know if the tolerance variance on the blueprints was acceptable. So she ignored them, or she sent back vague replies like, "Handle it," to which I would reply, "Please clarify specific authorization code for accounting." She never had the code. The job stalled. The shop floor felt the change first. The men and women who ran the machines were not stupid. They knew who signed the checks, but they also knew who made sure there was money in the account to cover them. On Thursday, I walked out to the floor to get a coffee from the vending machine. I passed by the workstation of Elias, a veteran technician who had been with Warren Tool since before I was born. He was wiping down his lathe with a rag, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped when he saw me. He looked around to make sure Douglas wasn't on the catwalk. Then he leaned in. Camille, he said, his voice low over the hum of the ventilation fans. We are out of the 3/4-inch bits. I put the REQ in on Monday. Nothing came. I saw the request. Elias, I said softly. I forwarded it to purchasing. Purchasing is Brielle now, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Elias spat on the floor. A violation of code that I would have reprimanded him for 2 weeks ago. Today, I just watched. It is weird, he said, looking me right in the eye. It is weird seeing them act like you are replaceable. They are walking around here like they hit a home run, but they don't even know they are standing on third base. You built this line, kid. I am just support now. Elias, I said. Support, he scoffed. That is like saying the spine is just support for the ribs. Watch yourself. Camille, when this thing tips over, don't be standing underneath it. I won't be, I promised him. The validation from the floor kept me sane, but the validation from the outside world was what gave me leverage. The breakdown of our systems was not contained within our 4 walls. It leaked out. It bled into our supply chain. Suppliers who were used to my instant responses were now dealing with Brielle's black hole of an inbox. On Friday afternoon, I got a call on my direct line from Greg, a sales rep at our primary steel vendor in Alabama. Camille, level with me, Greg said. He didn't say hello. I have 3 invoices over 30 days past due. Accounting is telling me they are in review. I have never had a late payment from you guys in 6 years. What is going on? I leaned back in my chair. I am not in charge of accounts payable anymore. Greg, you need to speak to Marlene or Brielle. There was a long pause on the line. Marlene? Marlene hasn't looked at an invoice since 1998, and Brielle? Well, I met Brielle at the Christmas party. She thought stainless steel was a brand name. I can't help you. Greg, my hands are tied. Are you still staying? Greg asked. The question was sharp, direct, because if you are leaving, I need to know. I am holding $100,000 of inventory for you guys on a handshake deal. That handshake was with you. Not your dad, not your sister, you. I am currently fulfilling my contract as operational support, I said, choosing my words with the precision of a lawyer. Okay, Greg said. That is an answer. I am putting the next shipment on credit hold. He hung up. I logged the call. June 25th. Credit hold initiated by primary steel vendor, production stoppage imminent, but the most critical blow came via email. It was late Friday. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the dusty floor of the office. My computer pinged. I opened the message. The sender was Harrison Thorne. Harrison was the senior procurement director for Apex Industries. Apex was our whale. They accounted for 60% of our revenue. They were the contract that kept the lights on. I had spent 3 years cultivating a relationship with Harrison. I knew his kids' names. I knew how he liked his reports formatted. We had a rhythm. The subject line was simple. Project Alpha. Lead contact? I opened it. Camille, I hope you are well. We are reviewing the Q3 production schedule for the Alpha line. I sent over the preliminary specs on Tuesday to the general inbox, but I haven't received a confirmation. I also noticed that the last 2 quality reports were signed by Brielle Warren. I need to be direct. The complexity of the Alpha line requires a specific level of technical oversight. Are you still the lead on our account? If there has been a restructuring, we need to be formally notified so we can assess the risk profile. Best, Harrison. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the thread that could unravel the entire sweater. Douglas and Brielle believed that the Apex contract was secure because of the Warren legacy. They thought Harrison bought from us because we were a family business. They didn't understand that Harrison bought from us because I had created a zero-defect protocol specifically for his needs. If I answered emotionally, if I said, "They pushed me out. They are idiots," I would look unprofessional. I would look like a disgruntled employee. Harrison would view me as a risk. But if I lied and said, "Everything is fine," I would be complicit in the inevitable failure. I took a deep breath. I typed my response. I stripped away all the emotion. I stripped away the anger. I left only the cold, hard facts. Dear Harrison, thank you for reaching out. It is good to hear from you. Regarding the Alpha line specs, I am no longer the primary point of contact for this account. Following a recent internal restructuring, Brielle Warren, managing owner, has assumed direct oversight of all client relationships and quality assurance protocols. My role has transitioned to a back-end operational support capacity with a scheduled phase-down. Please direct all future technical inquiries and approval requests to Brielle directly to ensure they are handled by the current leadership team. Best regards. Camille. I hit send. I didn't say they were incompetent. I didn't say the project would fail. I simply stated that I was not the one driving the bus anymore. I handed the wheel to Brielle, publicly and in writing. Right as the bus was approaching a cliff, I knew Harrison. He would read managing owner and scheduled phase down, and he would translate that immediately to brain drain. I closed my laptop. I felt a strange mixture of guilt and liberation. I was letting the fire burn. Yes, but I hadn't lit the match. I had just stopped holding the hose. I left the office exactly at 5 o'clock. I had a meeting. I drove to a diner on the outskirts of town, a place with vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like battery acid. Sitting in the back corner was a man named Arthur. Arthur was the operations manager at Warren Tool before me. He had retired 5 years ago. He was the one who taught me how to read a blueprint. He was the one who told me, years ago, "You are too smart for this place. Camille." He looked older now. His hair was thinner, but his eyes were still sharp. "You look tired, kid," he said as I slid into the booth. "I am tired, Arthur, but I am waking up." I ordered a black coffee. We made small talk for a few minutes. The weather, his grandkids, the humidity. Then Arthur leaned forward, his expression serious. "I heard about the graduation," he said, "and I heard about Brielle." "News travels fast," I said. "It does in this town, especially when your mother is talking." I froze. "What do you mean?" Arthur looked around the diner, then lowered his voice. "I still have friends at the country club, people who play bridge with Marlene. She's been talking, a lot." "Talking about what? How proud she is of the new managing owner?" Arthur shook his head. "No, she's been talking about retirement. She's been talking about a liquidity event." He took a sip of his coffee. "Camille, she has been shopping the business for 6 months. She's been meeting with a broker from Atlanta. The plan isn't to pass the torch to Brielle. The plan is to dress the company up, put a pretty face on it, a young, dynamic female CEO, and sell the whole thing to a private equity firm." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Sell it?" I whispered. "But Dad talks about legacy. He talks about the 100-year plan." "Douglas believes his own lies," Arthur said. "But Marlene runs the money, and Marlene wants out. She wants a condo in Florida and a clean break. They think if they show a modernized management structure, they can get a higher multiple on the sale. They are using Brielle as the hood ornament to attract a buyer." "And me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You are the overhead," Arthur said gently. "You are the expensive employee with the high salary and the opinions. Private equity firms hate that. They want a streamlined org chart. Getting rid of you, phasing you down, makes the balance sheet look leaner for the trailing 12 months. I sat back against the vinyl seat. It wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just that they loved Brielle more. It was a transaction. The ownership transfer folder, the phase down, the guarantor signature. It all clicked into place. They weren't building a dynasty. They were flipping a house. They were slapping a coat of paint on a rotting structure, forging my name to pay for the paint, and planning to cash out before the roof collapsed. And they were going to leave me with nothing but the debt. "They are selling it," I said, the realization tasting like ash. "That is the word," Arthur said. "And if they sell it with your name on those guarantees, and the new owners strip the assets, you know what happens." "I know," I said. "I go bankrupt. You have to get out. Camille." Arthur said. "You have to get your name off that paper." "I will," I said. My voice was cold. "But first, I am going to make sure there is nothing left to sell." I paid for the coffee. I walked out into the night. The validation was complete. The system was broken. The clients were spooked. And now I knew the endgame. I wasn't just fighting for my pride anymore. I wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table. I was fighting a hostile takeover of my own life. I got into my car and looked at my phone. There was a missed call from Douglas. Probably panic about the credit hold. I didn't call back. The exit strategy was no longer just about leaving. It was about escaping a burning building and locking the doors from the outside. Sunday dinner at the Warren household was a performance art piece curated entirely by my mother. It took place in the dining room of the Victorian house in the historic district, the house that the shop paid for, but the shop was never allowed to enter. The table was always set with the good china, the roast beef was always sliced thin, and the conversation was always a carefully navigated minefield of pleasantries where we pretended to be a normal, loving family. In the past, I would have arrived at 4 o'clock. I would have peeled the potatoes. I would have set the table. I would have listened to Marlene complain about the gardener or the pool boy while I did the work she didn't want to touch. I was the sous chef of the family image. This Sunday, I pulled into the driveway at 5:59. I sat in my car for 60 seconds, watching the digital clock on the dashboard. I checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror. I looked calm. I looked like a stranger. At 6 o'clock exactly, I walked to the front door. I didn't use my key. I rang the doorbell. It was a small act of aggression, treating my childhood home like a business appointment. Marlene answered the door. She was wearing a silk blouse and holding a glass of Chardonnay. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw me standing there with my purse slung over my shoulder, not holding a side dish or a bottle of wine. "Camille," she said, her voice tight. "You rang the bell." "I didn't want to intrude," I said. "Am I late?" "You are right on time," she said, stepping aside, though I could have used help with the gravy. "I am sure Brielle helped," I said, walking past her into the foyer. Marlene didn't answer. We both knew Brielle had never touched a whisk in her life. I walked into the dining room. Douglas was already seated at the head of the table, nursing a scotch. He looked tired. The circles under his eyes were dark, a testament to the chaos that had been slowly consuming the shop all week. When he saw me, he flinched slightly, as if he expected me to start shouting about the air conditioning or the credit hold. "Evening, Dad," I said, taking my seat on the left side of the table. "Camille," he grunted. "Good to see you." Brielle arrived 10 minutes later. She breezed in through the back door, bringing a gust of warm air and the scent of expensive perfume. She was wearing a white linen jumpsuit that would have lasted 5 minutes on the shop floor before getting ruined. She was holding her phone, recording a video. "So sorry I'm late, guys," she said to the camera, then to us. The traffic was a nightmare, and I had to stop and approve some proofs for the new logo. Being a boss never stops. Happy Sunday. She ended the video, slipped the phone into her pocket, and sat down opposite me. She looked glowing. She looked like she was winning. "You wouldn't believe the week I have had," Brielle said as she unfolded her napkin. "So many decisions. I feel like my brain is frying. Being in charge is exhausting." Douglas nodded sympathetically. "It is a heavy weight, sweetie, but you are handling it." I picked up my water glass and took a sip. The water was cold. My hands were steady. "Speaking of heavy weights," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of silverware on porcelain. I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a gun. I pulled out a plain white envelope. I placed it on the table, right next to the crystal butter dish. "I found some interesting reading material in the office on Tuesday night," I said. "I thought we should discuss it." The room went quiet. The air conditioner hummed. A grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Douglas looked at the envelope. He knew. I saw the recognition flash in his eyes, the fear of a man whose secrets have been dug up from the backyard. He put his scotch down. His hand was shaking. "Camille, we are eating," Marlene said, her tone warning. Not at the table. Especially at the table, I said. Since the table is what we are really talking about, I reached into the envelope and slid the papers out. I fanned them out like a winning poker hand. The copy of the ownership transfer, the copy of the Articles of Amendment giving Brielle control, the copy of the loan application, and right on top, the magnified copy of the signature page with the name Camille Warren signed in Marlene's handwriting. "What is this?" Brielle asked. She squinted at the papers, bored. "Is this more boring compliance stuff? Camille, I told you, I don't do paperwork on Sundays. It isn't compliance." "Brielle," I said softly, "it is a felony." Douglas turned pale. He looked at Marlene. Marlene didn't look at Douglas. She looked at the papers, then she looked at me. Her expression didn't change. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, like I had tracked mud onto her white carpet. "You went through my private files," Douglas said. His voice was weak, lacking its usual bluster. "I went through the company files," I corrected him. "The company where I am a guarantor on a $250,000 loan, or at least, where I'm supposed to be." I pointed to the signature. "That isn't my signature." "Mom," I said. Marlene took a sip of her wine. She set the glass down carefully. "It needed to be done. Camille, you were busy with your little exams. We couldn't wait for you to come sign a piece of paper. The business needed the capital. So you forged my name?" "We expedited the process," Marlene said. "Don't be dramatic. It is family money. It is all the same pot." "It isn't the same pot," I said. "Because according to this document right here," I tapped the ownership transfer, "I don't have a pot. I have zero equity. I have a phase-down role. I have all the risk. And Brielle has all the asset." I looked at my sister. "Did you know?" Brielle looked at the documents. Finally understanding that this wasn't routine, she looked at Douglas. "Daddy? What is she talking about?" "She knows." "Brielle," I said. "She knows she didn't earn it, but she doesn't care." I turned back to my parents. The anger was rising now, hot and sharp, but I kept it in my throat. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of tears. "I just have one question," I said. "When were you going to tell me?" Douglas looked down at his plate. "Camille, we were going to tell you. We were just waiting for the right time. We didn't want to distract you from your graduation. We wanted to let you settle in." "Settle into what?" I asked. "To being an employee in the company I built? To being support for a sister who can't unlock the front door?" "We wanted to protect you," Douglas mumbled. "Stop it, Douglas," Marlene said. Her voice was sharp, cutting him off. She turned to me. She locked eyes with me. There was no warmth in her face. There was no motherly softness. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a woman who viewed her children as investments. "You want to know?" Marlene asked. "Fine. We weren't going to tell you until the sale went through." "Marlene," Douglas hissed. "She knows, Douglas. Look at her face. She knows everything." Marlene gestured to me with her wine glass. "You want the truth? Camille, here is the truth." She leaned forward. "Brielle is the face. She has the look. She has the personality. She can walk into a room and charm investors. She represents the future." "And me?" I asked. "What do I represent?" Marlene didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. She delivered the line that would echo in my head for the rest of my life. "Camille, you are built to work, not to lead." The words hung in the air. Built to work, like a mule, like a tractor, like a tool that you use until it breaks, and then you replace it. I felt a physical blow to my chest, but I didn't flinch. In a strange way, it was a relief. The pretense was gone. The lie that they loved us equally, that they valued hard work, was dead. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had raised me, who had critiqued my clothes, who had told me to cut my nails, who had used my credit score to renovate her life. "I see it," I said. My voice was a whisper, but it carried. "So I am useful, just not worthy," Marlene shrugged. A tiny, elegant movement. Everyone has a role. Camille, you are excellent at yours. Why can't that be enough? Because you stole my future to pay for her role, I said. I started to stand up. I was done. I was going to leave the papers on the table, walk out the door, and call my lawyer from the driveway. But then, a sound cut through the tension. Bzzz, bzzz. It was Douglas's phone. It was sitting on the table next to his scotch. He ignored it. Bzzz, bzzz. It persisted. Long, angry vibrations against the mahogany. Douglas glanced at the screen. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. "It is Harrison," he whispered. "From Apex." "On a Sunday?" Brielle asked. "That is rude. He never calls on Sunday," I said calmly. "Unless there is a catastrophe." Douglas looked at me. He looked at the phone. He looked back at me. Panic was starting to override his shame. "Answer it, Douglas," Marlene snapped. "It is the biggest contract we have." Douglas picked up the phone. He put it on speaker. Perhaps by accident, or perhaps because his hands were shaking so bad he hit the wrong button. "Harrison?" Douglas said, his voice cracking. "Hello? Douglas?" Harrison's voice filled the dining room. It was cold, clipped, and furious. "I am sorry to disturb your dinner, but I just finished reviewing the risk assessment for the Alpha Line renewal." "Yes," Douglas said. We are very excited about the renewal." "There isn't going to be a renewal." "Douglas," Harrison said. Brielle gasped. Marlene froze. "What?" Douglas choked out. "Why? We have a 100-year legacy. We have always delivered." "I got an email from your daughter on Friday," Harrison said. Douglas looked at me. I sat perfectly still. "Camille informed me that she is phasing out of the technical lead role," Harrison continued. "She informed me that Brielle is now the point of contact for quality assurance and critical path logistics." "Yes," Douglas said, trying to salvage it. "Yes, Brielle is stepping up. It is a new era." "Douglas, listen to me," Harrison cut him off. "I don't care about your eras. I care about my specs. I had my team audit Brielle's last 3 reports. They are nonsense. They are filled with errors. The only reason we haven't had a failure is because Camille was catching them on the back end." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. "If Camille is leaving," Harrison said, "then the risk profile is unacceptable. We are pulling the contract. I am sending the formal notice tomorrow morning. I just wanted to give you the courtesy of a heads up because of our history." "Wait!" Douglas screamed. He actually screamed. "Harrison, wait. She isn't leaving. It was a miscommunication, an internal error." "She said she is support now," Harrison said, "and that she is phasing down. Is that true or not?" Douglas looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, desperate. He was looking at the mule and realizing the cart couldn't move without it. "Camille?" he whispered. I looked at the phone. I leaned forward. "Hello? Harrison?" I said. "Camille?" Harrison's voice softened instantly. "Are you there?" "I am here," I said. "Are you leaving the line?" Harrison asked. "Because if you are staying, if you are the lead, I can tear up this termination notice, but I need to hear it from you. I need to know you are the one signing off on the steal." Douglas covered the mute button. He looked at me. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "Fix it," he hissed. "Camille, please, fix it. If we lose Apex, we lose everything, the sale, the bank loan. It all collapses." Marlene was looking at me too. The arrogance was gone. She looked terrified. She knew that without Apex, the business she wanted to sell was worthless. "Just tell him you are staying," Douglas begged. "Just this once, for the family." For the family. The phrase that had kept me in chains for a decade. I looked at Marlene, built to work, not to lead. I looked at the forged signature on the table. I looked at Douglas. "You want me to save you?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Douglas said. "Please." I took a breath. I looked at the phone. then back at them. "I can save the contract," I said, "but the price just went up." "Anything," Douglas said. "Anything you want." "I am not doing it for family," I said, "and I am not doing it for a promise." I reached out and tapped the mute button, unmuting the call. "Harrison," I said clearly, "we are working through the details of the restructuring right now. There has been a renegotiation." "Okay," Harrison said. "So are you the lead or not?" I looked Douglas dead in the eye. "I am willing to be the lead," I said to my father. "Not the phone. But not without a written agreement, not without equity, and not as support." I pointed to the papers on the table. "You have until tomorrow morning to draft a new operating agreement," I whispered to Douglas. "Real ownership, 40%, and full operational control. Or I tell Harrison right now that I am done, and you can explain to the bank why their guarantor doesn't have a job." Douglas nodded. He bobbed his head up and down like a bobblehead doll. He had no choice. "She is staying. Harrison," Douglas shouted into the phone. Camille is taking lead. Fully." "Good," Harrison said. "Have her email me the confirmation by 9 a.m. Good night." The line went dead. The room was silent again, but the dynamic had shifted. The gravity had moved to my side of the table. I stood up. I picked up my envelope. "I will have my lawyer send over the term sheet in the morning," I said to Marlene. "I suggest you sign it. You are right. Mom, I am built to work, but from now on, I am working for myself." I turned and walked out of the dining room. I didn't stay for the roast beef. I had lost my appetite for their food, but I had just found a hunger for something else entirely. The Monday morning after the dinner did not bring a surrender. It brought a stall. I had left the dining room with a clear ultimatum: send the term sheet by 9 o'clock or the deal dies. I expected my father to panic and comply. I expected Marlene to realize the sale of her legacy was contingent on my cooperation and force his hand, but I had underestimated their capacity for delusion. They didn't send a term sheet. They sent a fruit basket. It arrived at my apartment at 8:30. It was wrapped in cellophane with an oversized gold bow, filled with pears that looked bruised and cheese that smelled like plastic. The card, written in Brielle's looping, childish script, read, "Let's all take a breath. We are a family. See you at the office at 10? XOXO." I stared at the basket. They thought they could buy my silence with cheddar and a smiley face. They thought Sunday night was just a temper tantrum, a flare-up of sibling rivalry that could be smoothed over with a cool-down period. They were wrong. At 9 o'clock exactly, I did not go to the office. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and watched the dominoes begin to fall. The first tile was Harrison at Apex Industries. Douglas had evidently tried to bluff him. I saw the email in the sent folder of the server I still had back-end access to. At 8:45, Douglas had written to Harrison, "Good news. Camille is on board as a senior advisor to the executive team. We are moving forward." Senior advisor, not lead, not partner, advisor. A role with no teeth, no equity, and no authority. Harrison's response came at 9:15. It was not an email to Douglas. It was a formal letter attached to a notification, copying the entire board and the legal department. Subject: Notice of Suspension, Project Alpha. I read the text. It was polite, precise, and absolutely devastating. Dear Mr. Warren, pursuant to Clause 14 of our Master Service Agreement regarding key personnel and stability, Apex Industries is hereby issuing a formal stop work order on the Alpha production line. Effective immediately. We have not received adequate assurance regarding the continuity of technical leadership. All pending invoices are frozen until a full audit of your quality assurance protocols is completed. We require a remediation plan within 48 hours, or we will exercise our right to terminate for cause. Terminate for cause. That meant no kill fee, no severance, just a dead contract and a massive lawsuit for breach of delivery. I took a sip of my coffee. The senior advisor bluff had just cost them 60% of their revenue stream. The second domino fell at 11 o'clock. The bank. Banks are like sharks. They can smell blood in the water from miles away. The Apex contract was the collateral for the line of credit. The very same line of credit Marlene had forged my name to secure. The moment Harrison flagged the invoices as frozen, the bank's algorithm tripped. I wasn't in the office to hear the phone ring, but I didn't need to be. I could see the panic in the digital footprint. I saw Douglas open a file named Loan Covenants 2024 3 times in 5 minutes. Then, my phone rang. It wasn't Douglas. It was the bank's automated system. Calling the guarantors. This is an automated alert regarding the credit facility ending in 492. A covenant breach has been detected. Please contact the Risk Management Department immediately. I let it go to voicemail. At noon, I received a frantic text from Sarah. The receptionist. Camille, please pick up. There are 2 men in suits in the lobby asking for the CFO. Your dad is locked in his office and won't come out. Brielle is crying in the break room. I didn't reply. I wasn't the CFO. I was operational support, phase down, and support staff do not handle men in suits. By 1 o'clock, Brielle tried to fix it. I have to give her credit for confidence. If nothing else, she sent a company-wide email, which she also posted to the company LinkedIn page. To our valued partners, Warren Tool and Lineworks is undergoing an exciting strategic pivot. We are streamlining our management to better serve the modern market. While there are always bumps in the road to greatness, our vision remains clear. Ignore the noise. We are building the future. Pivot leadership growth, mindset. It was a word salad. It was vague, polished, and completely empty. It used 3 exclamation points and 0 facts. I watched the comments roll in. Does this mean the Alpha line is down? Asked a supplier. When are we getting paid? Asked a vendor. What is a pivot? Asked a confused employee. Brielle deleted the comments as fast as they appeared, but she couldn't delete the reality. The pivot she was talking about was actually a tailspin. At 2 o'clock, Marlene called. She didn't call my cell. She called my landline, a number only she used. I let it ring 4 times before picking up. Hello, Mother? Camille, she snapped. She sounded breathless. Tight. You have to stop this. Right now. Stop what? I asked calmly. I am sitting in my kitchen. I haven't done anything. You know exactly what you're doing, she hissed. Harrison called the office. He said he won't speak to Douglas. He will only speak to you. You need to call him and tell him to lift the suspension. I can't do that, I said. Why not? Are you this petty? Are you willing to destroy your father's legacy because your feelings are hurt? It is not about feelings. Mother, it is about liability. I am not an officer of the company. If I call Harrison and give him assurances that I cannot legally back up, I am committing fraud. Again. Fraud? Marlene laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. Oh, don't be dramatic. It is business. You tell him what he needs to hear, and we figure it out later. No, I said. That is how you operate. That is not how I operate. People are talking. Camille, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Mrs. Gable at the club asked me if Douglas was having heart trouble because she heard an ambulance was called to the industrial park. It wasn't us. But the rumor is out there. If this gets out, if people think we are insolvent, we are ruined. Do you understand? Ruined. She didn't care about the employees. She didn't care about the contract. She cared that Mrs. Gable might think she was poor. Then I suggest you sign the term sheet, I said. We are not giving you 40%, she spat. It is absurd. Brielle is the managing owner. We can't just demote her. It would look terrible. Then enjoy the pivot, I said. Goodbye, Marlene. I hung up. 10 minutes later, I sent my own email. I sent it to Douglas, Marlene, and Brielle. I blind copied my personal attorney and the secure server. Subject: Conditions for re-engagement. Dear management team, following the events of the last 24 hours, including the suspension of the Apex contract and the reported covenant breach with the primary lender, I am writing to clarify my position. I will not provide unpaid labor. I will not provide emergency consulting. I will not communicate with clients, vendors, or lenders on behalf of Warren Tool and Lineworks. Any future involvement from me requires the following conditions to be met in writing. 1. A formalized employment contract designating me as Chief Operating Officer with full autonomy over production and logistics. 2. An equity stake of 40%, vested immediately. 3. A retroactive salary adjustment for the last 3 years of misclassified labor. 4. Full indemnification for any financial liabilities incurred prior to this date, specifically regarding the unauthorized use of my signature on the expansion loan. Until these documents are signed and notarized, I am unavailable. Regards, Camille Warren. The response from Marlene came within 3 minutes. It was short. You are choosing money over your family. I hope you are proud of yourself. You are cold. Camille. Just cold. I read it twice. Choosing money over family. It was rich coming from a woman who had sold my credit rating to buy a new patio set. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I filed it in the folder marked Evidence. At 4 o'clock, I went to see my attorney. Evelyn. Evelyn was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who worked out of a small brick building downtown. She had been reviewing the copies I had made of the forged documents. When I walked into her office, she didn't offer me coffee. She looked grim. "Sit down, Camille," she said. I sat. "We have a problem," Evelyn said. She tapped the copy of the loan application. "This signature, it is a forgery, clearly, but it is a good one, and more importantly, it has been on file for 4 months. So, Evelyn said, leaning forward, if the business collapses this week, which it looks like it might, the bank is going to call this note. They are going to come after the guarantors. They will seize the shop assets, your parents' house, and then they will come for you." "But I didn't sign it," I said. "We can prove that." "We can," Evelyn admitted. "But that takes time. Forensic handwriting analysis takes weeks. Court dates take months. The bank doesn't wait for court dates. They will freeze your accounts immediately. They will garnish your wages if you get another job. They will destroy your credit score before we ever get a judge to say you are innocent." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "So I am trapped?" "Not trapped," Evelyn said. "But you are in the blast zone. If you let the company fail right now, the debris hits you. You need to keep the company alive long enough to get your name off that paper legally, or you need to force them to refinance without you." "They can't refinance," I said. "Their credit is garbage. That is why they used me." "Then you have a dangerous needle to thread," Evelyn said. "You have to save the patient so you can extract the poison. If they go under today, you go down with the ship, even if you weren't the captain." I left her office feeling heavier than when I arrived. The satisfaction of watching them panic was gone, replaced by the terrifying reality of the legal trap they had built for me. I couldn't just walk away. They had chained me to the radiator before they set the house on fire. I drove home in silence. At 8 o'clock that night, my phone rang. It was Douglas. I debated not answering, but Evelyn's words were ringing in my ears. "You have to save the patient." I picked up. "Hello?" "Millie," Douglas said. He hadn't called me Millie since I was 12 years old. His voice was soft, cracking at the edges. He didn't sound like the blustering boss who barked orders. He sounded like an old man who was frightened. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my guard up. "I am sitting here in the dark," he said. "In the office. Everyone has gone home. Brielle left hours ago. She couldn't handle the stress." "She is not built for it," I said. "No," he whispered. "She isn't. You were right. You were always right." He sighed. A long, rattling sound. "I remember when you were a little girl. Millie, you used to follow me around with that plastic tool belt. You used to say, 'I can fix it, Daddy.' You always fixed it. I am not a little girl anymore." Dad, I know, he said. I know, I messed up. Millie, I listened to your mother. She has this way of making things sound so easy. She said the sale would set us all up for life. She said Brielle just needed a chance to shine. And the signature? I asked. Did she tell you about that too? Silence. I didn't know until it was done, he said. His voice was barely audible. I came in one morning and the papers were sent. She said it was just a formality. I should have stopped it. I was weak. Yes, I said. You were. Please, honey, he said. Don't let it end like this. Not for the money, but for me. I built this place with my bare hands. If the bank comes tomorrow, if they lock the doors, it kills me. Literally, it will kill me. He was crying now. Soft, pathetic sobs. It was the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal. The pity. He was trying to make me feel responsible for his survival. He was trying to turn the victim into the savior. I felt a tug in my chest, a deep, ancient instinct to help him, to say, it's okay. Daddy, I'll fix it. I'll call Harrison. I'll work for free. Just stop crying. But then I looked at the folder on my kitchen table, the phase-down document, the lie that had lasted for years. If I gave in now, if I let the emotion win, nothing would change. They would use me to put out the fire, and then they would lock me back in the basement. He was sorry because he was losing, not because he had hurt me. I gripped the phone tight. Dad, I said. Yes, honey? He sounded hopeful. I can't help you based on a memory, I said. And I can't help you based on tears. What? If you want to save the shop, I said, my voice steady and cold. You know the terms. They are in your inbox. Millie, please, talk to my attorney, Dad. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the silence of my apartment. My hands were shaking. Just a little. It hurts to cut the cord, even when the cord is strangling you. I didn't turn off the lights. I waited. The dominoes were still falling, and the biggest one was about to hit the ground. Tomorrow was Tuesday. The 48-hour window from Apex would close. They had 12 hours to decide if they wanted to keep their pride or keep their business. And I had 12 hours to pray that Evelyn was wrong about the blast zone. Tuesday morning did not bring the apocalypse I had expected. It brought a text message. It was not from Douglas, begging for a reprieve. It was not from Marlene, issuing another threat about family loyalty. It was from a number I didn't have saved, but the area code was familiar. Atlanta. Starbucks on 4th, 10 o'clock, off the record. Harrison. I stared at the screen. The deadline for the Apex contract remediation had technically expired at 9 o'clock that morning. By all rights, the lawyer should be drafting the termination papers right now, but Harrison wanted coffee. I dressed carefully, for the first time in my life. I wasn't dressing for the shop floor. I wasn't wearing steel-toed boots or a blouse that I didn't mind getting grease on. I put on a navy blazer, sharp trousers, and heels. I dressed like the chief operating officer I should have been. I arrived at the coffee shop at 9:55. Harrison was already there, sitting at a small table in the back, far away from the counter and the noise of the espresso machines. He was wearing a casual polo shirt, not his usual suit. This was definitely unofficial. Camille, he said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was firm, warm, and professional. Thanks for coming. I assume we are not here to discuss the weather. Harrison, I said, sitting down. No, he said. He took a sip of his black coffee. We are here to discuss why I am about to ruin your father's week, and why I want to make sure I don't ruin yours. He placed a folder on the table. It wasn't the thick contract binder. It was a single sheet of paper, heavily highlighted in yellow. Do you know what this is? He asked. I glanced at it. It was a page from the master service agreement between Apex Industries and Warren Tool. I had seen the contract a dozen times. I had helped implement the protocols it required. It is the risk mitigation clause, I said. Standard language. Look closer, Harrison said. Look at Addendum B, subsection 4. I leaned in. I read the text. My breath caught in my throat. Key personnel requirement. To ensure continuity of quality standards for the Alpha production line, the vendor agrees that the direct oversight of Camille Warren is a material condition of this agreement. Any change in her role, capacity, or employment status must be communicated to the client in writing 30 days prior. Failure to maintain this oversight constitutes a material breach of risk control. I read it twice. My name, my specific name, not lead engineer, not operations manager, Camille Warren. I didn't know this was in here, I whispered. I never saw the final signed version of the renewal last year. Douglas handled the signature page. I insisted on it, Harrison said quietly. After the supply chain crisis in 2022, when you personally flew those parts to us in a rental plane, I told my board that Warren Tool was a liability, but Camille Warren was an asset. We wrote you into the contract as a safety mechanism. I sat back, the realization washing over me like cold water. My father knew. When he signed that contract renewal last year, the one that secured the biggest revenue stream in the company's history, he knew that my employment was a legal requirement. And yet, 4 months ago, he sat down with a lawyer and drafted a plan to phase me out. He had signed a contract promising my labor to a client. While simultaneously planning to fire me in favor of Brielle, it wasn't just a betrayal of a daughter, it was corporate fraud. He was selling a product he knew he intended to sabotage. He knew, I said. He knew he couldn't fire me without losing the contract. That is why they kept me as support. That is why they didn't just let me go. Exactly, Harrison said. They tried to cheat the clause. They thought if they kept you on the payroll but stripped your authority, they could trick us on a technicality. But the quality reports from last week proved them wrong. Brielle isn't oversight. She is a rubber stamp. So, what happens now? I asked. Now, I terminate the contract, Harrison said simply. I sent the letter at 9:30. Warren Tool is out. We are pulling the Alpha line. That will bankrupt them, I said. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. That is not my problem, Harrison said. My problem is that I have a production schedule to meet, and I just fired my manufacturer. I need a new shop, and more importantly, I need the person who knows how to run the protocols. He reached into his bag and pulled out another folder. This one was cream-colored, with a logo I didn't recognize. Northgate Process Group. Northgate is a partner firm of ours, Harrison explained. They are based in Charleston. Much bigger operation, better equipment. They have been trying to bid on the Alpha line for 2 years. I called their CEO this morning. I told him I'm moving the contract to Northgate, on one condition. He slid the folder across the table to me. That they hire the person who wrote the manual. I opened the folder. It was an offer letter. Position: Director of Process Engineering. Base salary: $140,000. Signing bonus: $15,000. Benefits: full coverage, immediately vested. I stared at the numbers. The salary was double what I was making at Warren Tool. Double. And that was before I even factored in the unpaid overtime I used to work. I don't know what to say, I stammered. Say yes, Harrison said. Camille, you have spent 10 years keeping a sinking ship afloat with buckets. Come work on a ship that actually has an engine. I looked at the offer. I looked at the man who respected my work enough to write my name into a contract without me even knowing. I have conditions, I said. The old Camille would have just said thank you. The new Camille. The one forged in the fire of the last week. Negotiated. Name them, Harrison said. I need a remote start for the first month. I said, I have legal matters to settle here. I can't move to Charleston immediately. Done. I need a distinct clause in my contract that defines my intellectual property, I continued. The maintenance protocols I developed? They belong to me, not Northgate. I am licensing them to you for this job. Harrison raised an eyebrow. He looked impressed. Smart. I will have legal draft it. And one more thing, I said. I want it in writing that I have zero liability for the transition from the previous vendor. If Warren Tool crashes, I am not the one sweeping up the debris. Agreed, Harrison said. He extended his hand again. Welcome to the big leagues. Camille. I shook his hand. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lightheaded. I wasn't unemployed. I wasn't a phase-down support staff. I was a director, and for the first time in my life, I was being paid for my brain, not my bloodline. While my life was expanding, Warren Tool and Lineworks was contracting. I didn't go back to the shop, but in a small town. You don't need to be present to see the collapse. You just have to listen to the echoes. The termination notice from Apex must have hit Douglas's inbox around 10 o'clock. By noon, the rumors were flying. I got a text from Elias, the technician. They just sent the night shift home. Said it is a temporary scheduling adjustment. Douglas looks like he saw a ghost. Brielle is locking herself in the conference room. The loss of the Apex contract meant 60% of the revenue was gone instantly, but the overhead remained, the rent, the electricity, the payroll for 40 employees, and the debt service on the loan. It all still had to be paid. Without the Apex invoices coming in, there was no cash flow. Without cash flow, the dominoes I had envisioned started to click-clack against each other in rapid succession. Brielle, true to form, did not address the crisis. She tried to drown it out. I watched her social media from the safety of my living room. She was posting stories like a woman possessed. Post 1, 2 p.m. A photo of her desk with a stack of random papers and a latte. Caption, grinding through the hurdles. True leaders thrive in chaos. Big changes coming for Warren Tool. Watch this space empire building. Post 2, 4 p.m. A selfie in the mirror of the executive bathroom. Caption, they hate to see a woman winning. But I keep my head high and my heels higher. Focus on the vision, not the noise. She was trying to manifest a reality that didn't exist. She was screaming into the void, hoping the algorithm would save her from the balance sheet. It was pathetic, and for the first time. I didn't feel angry at her. I felt a distant, clinical pity. She was a child playing dress-up in a burning house. My life, on the other hand, became quietly, beautifully boring. For the next 3 days, I didn't set an alarm for 5 a.m. I slept until 7. The dark circles under my eyes began to fade. The constant, gnawing knot in my stomach, the one that had been there since I was 16, uncoiled. I cooked dinner, real dinner, not takeout eaten over a steering wheel. I made roast chicken and vegetables. I sat on my balcony and read a novel. I realized that for a decade, I had been in a state of chronic fight-or-flight. My cortisol levels had been keeping me vibrating at a frequency that was unsustainable. Now, with the Northgate offer signed and my resignation from Warren Tool effectively delivered by my silence, I felt like a diver surfacing after holding her breath for too long. The air tasted sweet. I started organizing my move to Charleston. I looked at apartments online, places with big windows and no grease stains on the carpet. I started dreaming about a life where my last name didn't define my worth, but the past has a way of trying to claw you back right when you reach the exit. On Friday afternoon, 5 days after the Sunday dinner showdown, I was sitting on my floor, packing books into a box. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was a mail carrier. He was holding a thick, rigid envelope with a red stripe. Certified mail. My stomach tightened. Just a reflex. I opened the door and signed for it. The return address was a law firm in Savannah. Not the family lawyer my father used for wills and traffic tickets, a corporate litigation firm. High-priced, aggressive. I took the envelope into the kitchen. I used a knife to slit the top. I pulled out the document. It was heavy, bonded paper. Cease and desist order and demand for damages. I scanned the header. Plaintiff, Warren Tool and Lineworks, LLC, defendant, Camille Warren. I started to read. The legal jargon was dense, but the accusation was clear as day. Hereby notified that you are in violation of your fiduciary duties and confidentiality agreements. Malicious interference with business relations causing the termination of the Apex Industries contract. Defamation of character regarding the professional reputation of the managing owner, Brielle Warren. And then, the kicker. Plaintiff seeks damages in the amount of $4 million for lost revenue and brand devaluation. I put the letter down on the counter. They were suing me. My mother, because this had Marlene written all over it, had decided that the only way to save the sinking ship was to blame the person who left it. They weren't taking responsibility for the fraud, or the incompetence, or the lies. They were constructing a narrative where I was the villain who sabotaged the legacy out of spite. They were accusing me of damaging the brand. I stared at the paper. A week ago, this would have crushed me. A week ago, I would have called my dad crying, asking how he could let this happen, but I wasn't that person anymore. I was the director of process engineering at Northgate. I was the woman who had documented every single email, every single hour, and every single forgery. I picked up my phone. I dialed Evelyn, my attorney. "Hey," I said when she answered. "I just got a letter." "Let me guess," Evelyn said. "They are suing you for the contract loss?" $4 million, I said. "Predictable," Evelyn said. "It is a desperation move. They are trying to scare you into coming back or settling. They want to use the lawsuit as leverage to force you to sign the loan guarantee for real." "It accuses me of damaging the brand," I said. "Well," Evelyn said, her voice sharp, "then I guess we have to ask the question." "What question?" "If you are damaging the brand," Evelyn said, "then why is your name the only thing keeping the bank from foreclosing? Why is your signature, the fake one, the most valuable asset they have?" I looked at the letter again. "Evelyn," I said, "I am done playing defense. They fired the first shot. I want to fire the last one." "What do you want to do?" I thought about the guarantor signature. I thought about the timeline. I thought about the fraud. "I want to respond," I said, "but not with a phone call. I want to respond with a counterclaim, and I want to audit the books." "That is war, Camille," Evelyn warned. "If we go there, there is no Sunday dinner, ever again." I looked at the packing boxes. I looked at the Northgate offer letter on my fridge. "I don't need Sunday dinner," I said. "I can buy my own roast beef. Let's burn it down." The hopeful momentum of my new life didn't stop. It just hardened. They thought a lawsuit would make me cower. They didn't realize that by suing me, they had just given me the legal right to drag every single one of their skeletons into the light of a courtroom. They didn't see this coming, but they were certainly going to see it going. The cease and desist letter sat on my kitchen counter like a radioactive isotope. I had read it 3 times, and each time, the audacity of it made my blood run a little colder. Marlene wasn't just suing me. She was trying to rewrite reality. The letter claimed that my resignation was a calculated act of sabotage designed to leverage undue influence over the company's clients. It painted me as a disgruntled employee who had thrown a wrench in the gears of a well-oiled machine, rather than the engineer who had been holding the gears together with her bare hands. I picked up the phone and called Evelyn. "You have read it?" I asked. "I have," Evelyn's voice came through the speaker, crisp and unbothered. "It is a standard intimidation tactic. Camille, they are throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. They know they don't have a case for defamation, but they are hoping the threat of legal fees will scare you into submission." "It is not scaring me," I said, looking at the box of legal documents I had organized on my dining table. "It is clarifying things." "Good," Evelyn said, "because I just drafted our response. I am not writing a 10-page defense. I am not going to argue with their fictional narrative about brand damage. I am sending a single letter to their counsel." "What does it say?" "It asks one question," Evelyn said, and I could practically hear her smiling. "If Camille Warren is actively damaging the brand and is considered a hostile actor, why is her personal guarantee the primary collateral for the company's newest line of credit?" I let out a short, sharp breath. It was the perfect trap. "Exactly," Evelyn continued. "If they claim you are damaging the business, they have to explain why they are relying on your creditworthiness to fund it. And if they admit they forged the signature, their lawsuit evaporates and they go to jail. They have painted themselves into a corner. Send it, I said. I already did. Courier. It will be on Marlene's desk by noon. But I wasn't satisfied with just a defensive maneuver. The lawsuit had triggered something in me, a need to understand the why. Why go to these lengths? Why forge the signature? Why install Brielle, who was manifestly incompetent, right before a major expansion? It seemed like suicide. I spent the next 6 hours doing what I did best, auditing the system. I pulled up the credit report screenshots I had taken. I laid them out next to the copies of the ownership transfer documents. I built a timeline on a notepad, drawing lines between dates and dollar amounts. February 14th. The ownership transfer is drafted. Moving control to Brielle. February 16th. The articles of amendment are filed with the state. February 18th. The loan application for $250,000 is submitted to the bank. February 20th. A retainer of $10,000 is paid to a firm in Atlanta called Vantage Capital Partners. I paused at the last entry. I had seen that name before. I dug through the scan of Douglas's calendar I had made before I lost access. There it was. Lunch with Vantage. February 22nd. I Googled Vantage Capital Partners. They weren't consultants. They were a boutique private equity firm specializing in distressed asset acquisition and brand revitalization. Their website was full of buzzwords: unlocking value, modernizing legacy, streamlining operations, and then I found a blog post on their site dated from January. The future of manufacturing is female. Why we invest in next-gen leadership. The pieces clicked together with the terrifying precision of a bear trap. This wasn't about a legacy. This wasn't about Douglas wanting to retire or Marlene wanting to empower her daughters. This was a setup for a sale. Marlene had been shopping the company to Vantage. Vantage likely told them that the business was too old-fashioned, too heavy with expensive operational staff, meaning me. They wanted a sleek, modern story to sell. They wanted a young, dynamic female CEO they could put on a brochure. Brielle wasn't the leader. She was the marketing strategy. And me? I was the expensive engineer who asked too many questions. I was the overhead they needed to cut to make the EBITDA look better for the sale. But they couldn't cut me entirely because they needed my credit score to secure the bridge loan to dress up the office before the buyers came for the final inspection. They had planned to use my credit to pump up the value, use Brielle's face to sell the deal, and then cash out before anyone realized the machine was broken. My God, I whispered to the empty room. They were going to sell it for parts. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Brielle. I stared at the name. I hadn't spoken to her since the dinner. I debated letting it ring, but curiosity won. I wanted to hear the voice of the managing owner, now that the walls were closing in. "Hello, Brielle," I said. "Camille, you have to stop this," she said immediately. Her voice was high and thin, trembling with a mixture of fear and entitlement. "Mom is freaking out. Dad is locking himself in the bathroom. The bank is calling every hour." "That sounds stressful," I said. "Welcome to leadership." "I didn't ask for this," she screamed. "I didn't ask for the bank calls. I just wanted the title. I wanted the vibe. I thought you were going to stay and do the boring stuff." "The boring stuff?" I repeated. "You mean the work? You mean the actual business?" "You know what I mean," she snapped. "You are being so selfish. You are ruining everything because you are jealous that Mom chose me." "I am not jealous. Brielle, I am relieved. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because when the forensic accountant looks at that loan application," I said, my voice drop dead calm, "he is going to see a signature that isn't mine, and then he is going to ask the managing owner who authorized the submission." Silence on the line. Heavy, terrified silence. "I didn't sign it," Brielle whispered. "Mom did." "Does it matter?" I asked. "You are the CEO. You are the controlling member. It happened on your watch. Ignorance isn't a defense. Brielle, it is negligence." "I will tell them you are crazy," she hissed. the pleading turning instantly to venom. I will tell everyone you are having a breakdown. I will tell them you are sabotaging us because you are bitter and ugly and no one loves you. Go ahead, I said. Tell them. Put it on Instagram. Make sure you use the right hashtags. But while you are doing that, I will be sending the handwriting analysis to the district attorney. You wouldn't, she choked out. We are sisters. We were sisters, I said. Now, we are just co-defendants in a fraud investigation, except I have proof I wasn't in the room. I hung up. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer toxicity of it. She was drowning, and her first instinct was to try and pull me under with her. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole. It was Douglas. He was alone. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing an old flannel shirt and jeans, the kind he used to wear on Saturdays when I was a kid, before Marlene made him start dressing like a country club member. I opened the door. He looked 20 years older than he had at graduation. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were red. Can I come in? He asked. No lawyers. No Marlene. Just me. I stepped aside. Coffee? Please. He sat at my kitchen table, looking around at the boxes. He saw the Northgate offer letter on the fridge, held up by a magnet. He stared at it for a long time. Northgate, he said softly. They are good people, solid shop. They offered me a job, Dad, I said, pouring 2 mugs. Director level, real pay. I am proud of you, he said. And the terrible thing was, I think he meant it. He was proud of me for escaping the trap he had helped build. Why are you here, Dad? I asked, sitting opposite him. He wrapped his hands around the mug, seeking warmth. Marlene wants to fight. She wants to take the lawsuit all the way. She thinks if we drag it out, you will run out of money for your lawyer. I won't, I said. Harrison is fronting my legal costs. Did you know that? The client you lied to is paying for my defense against you. Douglas flinched. He closed his eyes. I didn't know about the signature. Millie, I swear. I know you didn't hold the pen, I said. But you knew about the sale. You knew about Vantage. He looked up, startled. How did you... I can read a balance sheet, Dad, and I can read a calendar. You were selling the company out from under me. He sighed, a long, broken sound. Marlene. She was so tired of the business. She hated the dirt. She hated the noise. She met this broker, and he told her we could get a 5 multiple on EBITDA if we modernized. He said private equity loves a female-led story, but they meant a certain kind of female, marketable, charismatic. Brielle, I said. Yes, they said you were too. Operational. Too in the weeds. They said the new owners would bring in their own ops team. They wanted a figurehead to sign the deal and walk away. So you agreed to fire me, I said. To buy a condo in Florida. I agreed to give you a payout, he insisted, his voice rising weakly. The plan was to sell, and then give you a share of the proceeds. A big check, enough to start your own thing. But you didn't put that in writing, I said. You put phase down in writing. You put 0 equity in writing. We were going to make it right, he said. After the close. You were going to make it right with money you stole from my future, I said. And then Mom got greedy. She forged the signature because the cash flow was too tight to dress up the books for the buyer. She risked jail to get a better price. Douglas put his head in his hands. It is over, isn't it? The Apex deal is gone. The bank is pulling the line. Vantage isn't going to buy a company with no revenue and a fraud lawsuit. Yes, I said. The company is dead. Dad, Warren Toole is finished. He began to weep, silent, shaking sobs. I failed. I failed my father. I failed the legacy. I watched him. I felt a twinge of sadness. But it was distant. He hadn't failed the legacy. He had sold it. You can't save the company, I said. But you can save the people, the staff, Elias, Dave, the guys who actually work. He looked up, wiping his eyes. How? We can't make payroll next week. I have a plan. I said. But it requires you to do the one thing you have never done in your life. What? Stand up to Marlene. I laid out the endgame. It was brutal, simple, and effective. I am not coming back to Warren Tool, I said. That entity is toxic. It has bad debt, a fraudulent loan, and a destroyed reputation. But the assets, the machines, the building, the skilled labor, those are still valuable. I leaned forward. Northgate is willing to make an asset purchase offer. We won't buy the company. We won't take on your debt or your lawsuits. We will buy the equipment and the client list. We will hire the staff. We will effectively absorb the operation. And the Warren name? Douglas asked. Gone, I said. It becomes a Northgate facility. And us, the family? You get enough cash from the asset sale to pay off the bank loan, the real one and the fake one. You avoid foreclosure. You avoid jail. You walk away with zero profit, but you walk away clean. Brielle gets nothing. You get nothing. But the bank gets paid, and the employees keep their jobs. Douglas stared at me. He was processing the death of his ego. Marlene will never agree, he said. She wants the millions. She wants the buyout. There are no millions, Dad, I said. There is only this offer, or bankruptcy and a felony indictment. Those are the two doors. You need to make her walk through the first one. She will fight you. Let her, I said. Set the meeting, tomorrow, 10 a.m., at your office. Have the bank's counsel there. Have Harrison there. I will bring my lawyer. You want to do this in front of everyone? No more secrets, I said. No more family dinners. We do this in the light. Douglas stood up. He looked at the Northgate offer letter again. He touched the paper gently. You really wrote the manual, didn't you? He asked. Yes, I said. And now I am closing the book. He walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the knob. I am sorry, Millie. I know, Dad. See you at 10. He left. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the night preparing the documents with Evelyn. We drafted the asset purchase agreement. We drafted the release of liability. We drafted the confession of judgment regarding the signature, just in case. The next morning, I drove to the shop. The parking lot was full of cars, but the bay doors were half closed. The atmosphere was heavy, like the air before a tornado. I walked into the building. I didn't go to my old desk. I walked straight to the conference room, the glass-walled fishbowl where Brielle used to play executive. They were all there. Marlene was sitting at the head of the table, wearing a sharp red suit, her face a mask of furious defiance. She looked like a queen whose castle was burning, but who refused to leave the throne. Douglas was next to her, looking at his hands. Brielle was there, looking pale and small, scrolling nervously on her phone. The bank's attorney, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to the client, was there. Harrison from Apex was there, sitting next to him, and Evelyn was there, sitting next to an empty chair. I walked in. I didn't say hello. I didn't smile. I sat down in the empty chair. Let's get started, Marlene said, her voice icy. I assume you are here to apologize and drop this ridiculous counterclaim so we can get back to business. She still thought she was in charge. She still thought she could bully the room. I opened my folder. I took out the asset purchase agreement. I slid it across the table to the bank's attorney, not to Marlene. I am not here to apologize, I said. I am here to make an offer to purchase the assets of Warren Tool and Lineworks on behalf of Northgate Process Group. Marlene laughed. It was a harsh, incredulous sound. You? Buy us? With what money? You are a mechanic. Camille. I am a director, I corrected her. And I am not buying you. I am buying the machines you don't know how to run. I looked at the bank attorney. Mr. Henderson, I said, the offer on the table is sufficient to cover the outstanding principal of the primary mortgage and the recently acquired expansion line. It clears the bank's books. If you don't accept this, the alternative is a protracted fraud litigation regarding a forged guarantee. during which the company will almost certainly collapse and you will recover cents on the dollar. The bank attorney looked at the document. He looked at Marlene. He looked at the signature page I had included in the appendix, the one with the forgery. "Fraud litigation?" the attorney asked, his eyes narrowing. "Marlene," Douglas said softly, "it is over." "Shut up, Douglas," Marlene snapped. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You think you can come in here and steal this from us? This is my company. I built this brand. I am not selling it for scrap to my ungrateful daughter." "Then you go to jail," I said. I said it quietly. I said it without anger. "The signature on the loan application is a forgery," I stated. "I have the handwriting analysis. I have the timeline. If you don't sign this asset sale today, right now, I walk out that door and I file a police report. The bank will call the loan immediately. You will lose the house. You will lose the cars. And you will likely lose your freedom." Marlene's face went white. She looked at Douglas, expecting him to defend her. Douglas didn't move. He kept staring at his hands. "Douglas?" she whispered. "Sign it." "Marlene," Douglas said. His voice was shaking, but it was distinct. "We lost." "We didn't lose," she hissed. "She betrayed us." "We sold her," Douglas said. He looked up, tears in his eyes. "We sold her out, and now we are paying the bill." Marlene looked around the room. She saw the bank attorney nodding in agreement with my offer. She saw Harrison looking at her with cold contempt. She saw Brielle shrinking into her chair. She looked at me, for the first time. She didn't see a daughter she could control. She saw a wall she couldn't break. "You are hateful," she whispered. "I am business," I said. "Sign the paper." She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled. She signed the death warrant of her legacy. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just watched the ink dry. The counterattack was complete. I hadn't just won the game. I had taken the board away. The ink on the asset purchase agreement was barely dry when we gathered for the final closing. If the meeting in Part 9 was the surrender, this meeting was the autopsy. It is one thing to agree to sell a company to avoid jail. It is another thing entirely to sit in a room with the people you defrauded and dissect exactly how the body died. We were back in the glass-walled conference room. The air conditioning had finally been fixed, likely because Brielle realized she couldn't host a closing in a sweatbox. So the room was freezing. The table was crowded. On one side sat the remnants of the Warren dynasty, Marlene, Douglas, and Brielle. On the other side sat the executioners, Mr. Henderson from the bank, Harrison from Apex, Evelyn, and me. Technically, this should have been a formality. The terms were agreed upon. Northgate would purchase the hard assets, the machinery, the inventory, the client lists, for a sum that exactly matched the outstanding debt of Warren Tool. There would be no profit for my parents, just an exit. But Mr. Henderson, the bank's attorney, was not a man who liked loose ends. He had the loan file open in front of him, and he was looking at it with the suspicion of a forensic pathologist. "Before we execute the release of the lien," Mr. Henderson said, his voice dry and scratching like sandpaper, "I have a few questions regarding the representations made in the original credit expansion application. We need to close out the compliance file." Marlene straightened her jacket. "Is this necessary? We are selling the assets. You are getting paid. Why do we need to dig up the past?" "Because," Mr. Henderson said, looking over his spectacles, "the bank is absorbing a significant administrative cost to facilitate this rush closing. And I want to ensure that the operational restructuring cited in your application was factual, not aspirational." He looked at me. "Ms. Warren, Camille, the application stated that your transition to operational support was a strategic move to allow Brielle Warren to modernize the workflow. Can you confirm the timeline of this modernization?" I didn't speak. I simply slid a black binder across the table. "This is the operational log for the last 6 months," I said. "It contains every email, Every calendar invite and every maintenance ticket. Mr. Henderson opened the binder. Harrison leaned in to look. Tab 1, I said, my voice clinical. February, the month the loan was applied for. You will see that while my title changed on paper, my workload increased by 30%. I was personally responsible for the calibration of the Alpha line, the negotiation of the steel contracts, and the safety audits. And Brielle Warren? Mr. Henderson asked. Tab 2, I said. Brielle attended 3 meetings in February. One was a lunch, one was a vision boarding session, one was a photo shoot for the website. Brielle flushed a deep, angry crimson. I was building the brand strategy. You can't log strategy on a timesheet. I can log results, I countered. Tab 3, May, the port crisis. I drove the truck. I loaded the pallets. The next morning, the company newsletter credited Brielle with crisis management. The log shows she did not log into her email until 10 o'clock the following morning. Harrison shook his head, a look of disgust on his face. We credited her too, he murmured. We sent a thank you note to the wrong person. The record is clear, I said to the room. There was no modernization. There was only a rebranding of my labor to fit a narrative for a buyer. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. He turned his eyes to Douglas. Mr. Warren, the banker said, this brings me to the guarantor. The loan was secured based on the creditworthiness of 4 individuals. The primary asset holder listed was Camille Warren. Douglas looked at the table. He was rubbing his knuckles. A nervous tic I hadn't seen since I was a child. Yes, Douglas whispered. We have a discrepancy. Mr. Henderson said. He pulled out the original signature page, the one Marlene had forged, and placed it next to the asset purchase agreement I had signed as the representative for Northgate. The signatures do not match, Mr. Henderson said. The slant is different, the pressure points are different, and frankly, the Camille Warren on the loan document looks remarkably similar to the Marlene Warren signature on the corporate resolution. The room went deadly silent. The hum of the projector fans seemed to roar. Marlene didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead, her jaw set in a line of granite. Signatures vary over time. People are in a rush. It is a technicality. It is not a technicality. Mrs. Warren, Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave. It is bank fraud. Obtaining capital under false pretenses is a federal crime, punishable by up to 30 years in prison and a fine of up to $1 million. Marlene's composure cracked, just a hairline fracture. But it was there. Her eyes darted to Douglas. Douglas approved it, she blurted out. Douglas's head snapped up. What? He knew, Marlene said, her voice rising. He knew we needed the money to stage the office for Vantage. He knew Camille wouldn't sign it because she was obsessed with the debt-to-equity ratio. He told me to get it done. I did not, Douglas shouted. He slammed his hand on the table, making Brielle jump. I told you to ask her. I told you to get her permission. I didn't know you signed it yourself until the alert came through. You coward, Marlene hissed. You were happy enough to spend the money. You liked the new leather chairs. You liked the country club dues we paid with that cash. Don't play the saint now. They were eating each other. The facade of the united. Perfect family was dissolving into a puddle of recriminations right there on the mahogany table. Stop it! Brielle screamed. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. I hate this, Brielle sobbed. I never wanted to be the owner. You made me do it. She pointed a shaking finger at Marlene. You said it would be easy, Brielle cried. You said Camille was going to be the ghost in the machine. You said she would do the work, and I just had to be the face, and then we would sell it and be rich. You told me that at Christmas, before I even graduated. I froze. Christmas? I asked quietly. Brielle looked at me, realizing she had just handed me the final nail for the coffin. Yes, she whispered. They planned it in December, before your final exams. They knew you were going to graduate top of your class, and they were terrified you would leave. So they built the phase down to trap you. They wanted to lock you in before you had options. I looked at Douglas. He couldn't meet my eyes. It wasn't just a business decision made in the spring. It was a conspiracy hatched over holiday eggnog. While I was buying them gifts, they were plotting how to enslave me. That establishes intent, Evelyn said from beside me. Her voice was cool, legal, final. Premeditated exploitation and fraud. Mr. Henderson closed the file. He looked at Marlene and Douglas with the kind of look one gives to a particularly nasty stain on a rug. The bank is not interested in continuing a relationship with this entity. Mr. Henderson said, "We are calling the note, effective immediately." "We can't pay it," Marlene shrieked. "That is why we are selling the assets." "Then you had better sign the closing documents." Mr. Henderson said, "Because if this deal with Northgate falls through, I am walking out of here and filing a criminal referral with the FBI, and Ms. Warren, Camille, has already provided us with the affidavit verifying the forgery." He pushed the stack of papers toward Douglas. "Sign over the assets, Mr. Warren. It is the only way you stay out of handcuffs." Douglas looked at the papers. He looked at the company logo at the top. Warren Tool and Lineworks. The logo his father had drawn on a napkin 50 years ago. He looked at me. "Millie," he croaked, "please, is there no other way? Can't you just come back? We can tear up the org chart. You can be CEO. We can fix this." I looked at him. I saw the fear, but I also saw the manipulation. He still thought this was a negotiation. He still thought my talent was a commodity he could barter for. "There is no coming back, Dad," I said. "The bridge is burned. I poured the gasoline, but you lit the match." I pointed to the line on the paper. "Harrison won't work with you," I said, gesturing to the Apex rep. "The bank won't lend to you, and I won't work for you. You are a company with no clients, no credit, and no staff. It is over." Douglas picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly the tip tapped a rhythm against the paper. Tap, tap, tap. He signed. He signed away the building. He signed away the machines. He signed away the legacy he had worshipped but never nurtured. He slid the papers to Marlene. Marlene stared at them. She looked at me one last time. "You think you won," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you are smart, but you are just a traitor. You destroyed your own family for a paycheck." "No, Mother," I said, meeting her gaze with a calmness that terrified her. "I didn't choose a paycheck. I chose a future. You wanted my labor, my loyalty, and my name, but you wanted them without giving me a life. You wanted a mule, not a daughter." "Just sign it, Marlene," Harrison said, checking his watch. "I have production to schedule." Marlene signed. She slashed her name across the page like she was cutting a throat. "Mr." Henderson gathered the papers. "The transfer is effective immediately. Northgate takes possession of the facility at midnight. All Warren Tool personnel effectively terminated, to be rehired at Northgate's discretion. We are keeping the staff," I said clearly. "Everyone stays, except the executive team." I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. "Brielle," I said, "you have until 5 o'clock to clear out your office. Leave the laptop. It belongs to Northgate now." Brielle didn't answer. She just put her head on the table and wept. I walked toward the door. Harrison and Evelyn followed me. "Camille," Douglas called out. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "What will you do?" he asked. "With the shop?" "I am going to run it," I said. "Properly. We are going to install the new CNC machines you said were too expensive. We are going to pay the vendors on time, and we are going to pay the staff what they are worth. It won't be Warren Tool anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "No," I said. "It will be a business, not a shrine." I pushed the door open. The cool air of the hallway hit my face. I walked out of the building. I walked past the reception desk where Sarah gave me a subtle thumbs up. I walked past the break room where the guys were eating lunch, waiting to hear if they still had jobs. I stepped out into the parking lot. The sun was shining. The air smelled of ozone and pine. I walked to my car. I didn't look back at the window where I knew my father was watching. I didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt I had expected. I didn't feel rage. I felt peace. It was a strange, quiet sensation. The noise in my head, the constant clamor of trying to prove myself, trying to earn love that was never for sale, was gone. I unlocked my car door and looked at the building one last time. The sign Warren Tool and Line Works looked small from here. It looked temporary. They would tell people I stole it. They would tell the country club that I was ruthless. They would rewrite the history to make themselves the victims. But I knew the truth, and the bank knew the truth, and the ledger knew the truth. They didn't lose the business when I left. They lost it the moment they decided I would stay silent forever. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I had a lot of work to do. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know family dynamics can be complicated, but sometimes you have to draw a line in the sand to save yourself. I would love to hear from you. Comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about justice being served, please subscribe to the Nina Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get this story out to more people who might need a little inspiration to stand up for themselves. See you in the next one.